Praise the Bruce. Another great day. Yeah.
The regular Board of County Commissioners meeting of Tuesday, January 24, 2017 will now be called to order, and we'll have an invocation by none other than Deputy Teddy Floyd from the Indian River County Sheriff's Office, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance led by Commissioner Tim Zork. Please rise.
Let us bow here. Father, we thank you for this day. We thank you for our commissioners. I thank you for my sheriff. I thank you for all of our respective commissioners all over throughout Indian River County. But most of all, God, I thank you for our community. I thank you for the wisdom. I thank you for the humbleness. God, I thank you for your guidance to continue to let us work together. God, I ask that you give us wisdom, understanding, and protect our community, God. When it's over, we'll give you the praise. Let us say amen.
Amen. Amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you all. First item on the agenda would be the additions and deletions to the agenda. We did have a request by staff to delete item 13C. That's by the County Attorney's Office and the County Administrator. And we also received some correspondence for an addition for item 14E by Commissioner Tim Zork as an emergency item.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. It's due to its time-sensitive nature. We needed to discuss this before our February meeting to provide guidance to staff, so that's the reason for adding it onto today's agenda.
Thank you for clarifying the emergency. Anything else?
Move to approve as amended.
Second. That's a motion by Commissioner O'Brien, seconded by myself. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you. Next item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes. We have none. And then we'll move on to informational items. There are 3 items. Anybody want to discuss any of them?
Mr. Chairman, just item 7C, the Sand Lake Conservation Tract and the youth hunting program. 2 points of that. One is board will recall that we gave permission for them program through the Fish and Wildlife Commission for youth hunting, and we allowed them to go out there on the Sand Lake track, and they had a very successful weekend out there, and glad to see that being utilized. But I think we've all had some discussions too with some of the environmental folks about access to Sand Lake, and I think there's been a flurry of emails going back and forth, but just we had heard from St. John's back in November about the access out there, and they didn't have a plan yet, and then staff has just recently reached out again to St. John's to try to move forward on getting access out there. So just kind of a quick update on that.
Thank you. I agree. It's a win-win situation in reducing the feral hog population, which has been quite disruptive in the area. Well, thank you. Next item is the consent agenda.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to pull item 8F from the consent agenda, please.
8F Foxtrot. Commissioner Solari, anything further here on the board? Members of the public, anybody want anything pulled for discussion? I see none.
Move to approve as amended.
Second.
I have a motion by Commissioner O'Brien, seconded by Commissioner Solari. No further discussion? All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Commissioner Solari.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. This item is the Public Works Annual Ledger of Traffic Control Devices. It's 21 pages. I know we do it each year, but for me, it seems to be just a very small piece of bureaucracy that's not really necessary. I think we could probably replace it with an annual email to the board and any interested parties, which just notes the additional traffic lights that were put in place over the past 12 months. Public Works would be keeping in its files its tally of all lights and everything like that and updating them. But my understanding is it'll save almost one person's labor for a day to not have to go through and put the actual agenda item on the consent agenda and compile it. And I recall this every year, and every year I ask myself, why are we actually doing this? I've missed the real purpose for it. So I would like to move that we simply have Public Works do what they do in the back room, keep the compilation of all the traffic control devices up, send an annual email to the board just listing the new devices, and then I guess we may have to actually amend the ordinance so that Public Works is no longer required to do this actual agenda item. So that's my motion.
Very
I'll
well.
second that.
Thank you.
Any further discussion? That's 8.
Actually, a question. Does it still include the approval of the resolution that's included as part of the pack-up today, Commissioner Solari?
For today, sure.
Okay, thanks.
That's a motion by Commissioner Solari, seconded by Commissioner Zork. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries unanimously.
And County Attorney's Office will be happy to bring back an ordinance to the board modifying the requirements in the code on this issue.
Thank you, Counselor. Next item is on public items is a public hearing. Public hearing for amendment for Section 100.03, the amendment or repeal of ordinances of Chapter 100, the general provisions of the Code of Indian River County, codifying and publishing the ordinances to readopt the code up to and including Supplement 119, which is legislative in nature.
Thank you very much to the chair. Per Florida statutes, the county is required to maintain a current codification of our ordinances. Each year, the county is required to publish such a codification. The attached ordinance merely modifies the code of ordinances to reflect the most recent supplement through November 8th, 2016. With that, just recommend that the board open up the public hearing, take any input from the public, close the public hearing, and adopt the ordinances presented. As opposed to the last item that was discussed, unfortunately, this is not a requirement in our code, but a requirement in Florida statutes, so I will not be able to bring back an ordinance to the board to modify this requirement.
Too bad, Commissioner.
Well, thank you, Counselor. We'll turn this back over to the public. We'll open up a public hearing. Does anyone want to speak regarding this matter? Having an ample opportunity for anyone to approach and speak, we will now see that there is none willing to or wishing to speak on this subject, so we will close the public hearing.
Move to approve recommendation.
Second. Well, we had several seconds, and what we'll do is we'll have a motion by Commissioner O'Brien, seconded by Commissioner Solari. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries unanimously
Thank you very much.
without an ordinance. Thank you, Counselor. Fine job. Next item is from General Services, item 12C1, which is the agreement with the Indian River County Fair Association Incorporated and the Vero Beach Firefighters Association Incorporated for the use of Indian River County's fairgrounds. And we have
Moving right along this morning.
Michael Zito.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Michael Zito,
Good morning.
Assistant County Administrator. The pride and joy of the Indian River County Firefighters Fair is upon us once again. Only this year marks the renewal of a traditional agreement between the Fair Association and the county. It does add in the Vero Beach Firefighters Association because they play an integral part in the planning and operation of the fair. The terms of the agreement are substantially similar with the exception that staff is recommending a more simplified method of calculating the rental fee. It's now moving from a third of net profits to a 10% share of gross revenue. And we have some representatives from the fair and staff here. Should you have any questions, there are also some updates to insurance and other ministerial terms. But in essence, we're just moving forward, the same relationship we've had, and moving to a more simplified method of calculating the fee. Take any questions you may have.
Any questions of staff regarding this change?
No questions, Mr. Chairman. Just glad to see this moving forward and looking forward to a great fair this year. So kudos to the firefighters for putting this on and all the hard work they do in the community. And I know, Steve, since you're here, could you
Yeah, I'd
just,
like them to
for a second,
talk a minute.
I know the last couple of years you guys have talked some about some of the electrical, power up there, and is there anything we need to do now? I mean, I think we've moved forward on the electric issue. Are there other things that you guys need that we can make sure the fair is successful for you guys?
I believe the electric has been substantially taken care of with the additions of the transformers. That was a great addition with the power issues we had in the past. The parking out in where you did the land clearing, that's helped us out. We haven't gone across the street in 2 years, so that's a very good thing. Big safety factor in our concerns there, so that's addressed that as well. But as we grow into the future, possibly some more lands clear there for parking, but we've done very well the last couple of years on our busy nights.
Great.
Where we haven't had to go across the street.
Very good. Well, keep up the good work. We really appreciate what y'all do for the community and putting that fair on. I know it's a lot of work, and so
Yes.
just let everybody know, the gals and guys involved in that it's great what y'all do, and we really appreciate it for the community.
Steve, the agreement, it'll work well for the association and the county, and
Yes.
you see no complications with it?
Yes, we work with staff, and I believe that'll be a more simplified agreement that we've come up with to address those concerns there. So, yes.
Well, we look forward to the fair. I think that most of our citizens look forward to the fair, and the fair itself has become part of our fabric for the community. And I know that when there was a discussion that we may not have the fair one year, we did get a lot of phone calls, and we got a lot of visits too. So I want to say in behalf of all the elements of complication in providing the fair and all the hard work that the individuals do, I want to say thank you for all of our citizens. It's a great event, and I know that many of us like to have the opportunity to volunteer and help along with the process too, and please look forward to that as well this year. So.
Thank you.
Is there any other further? Yes.
Just a note about, Steve mentioned that in the last 2 years they haven't had to park across the street, and that's wonderful, and that's in large part due to the Public Works directed and operated project to clear some additional space. There is a phase 2 to that project. Public Works is working diligently to try and get it before the fair. There's permitting issues involved. I don't know that it'll happen before, but insofar as we've been able to accommodate the capacity the last 2 years, it gives me some comfort that we can handle it with or without that additional clearing. But it is on Rich's long list of priorities.
Thank you.
Okay.
Sandy, anything else?
One thing to add, I had brought Commissioner O'Brien out there. We rode around the fair, I believe it was last year or the year prior.
I think 2 years ago.
Yes, we looked at the campground was getting to capacity as well. So if that's something that we can continue to look at, as far as I think there's plans to expand around that lake out back, if that's still in the works or if that's something we can still look at. I don't know if any of the other events that you hold out there reach capacity of the campground. So that's one of our things we look at each year as well. But those facilities are nice there, and then have an additional space if needed moving forward in years to come, so.
But there's ample hookups for those who have to reside during the 10 days?
We're pretty much at max capacity. We have been the last couple of years back in the campground.
Have you had to turn down any of the vendors that
We do,
did wish to stay there?
we may have had to send a couple out to the local KOA, but we do get most of them in there.
So it's minimal as far as?
Yes, at this time, it's minimal how many that we have to turn away, which I believe the KOA is just a couple miles down the road.
Right.
So they're okay with that, but they'd rather be on site if possible.
Sure.
Right.
Wake up, roll out, and get ready for the
Yes.
next morning.
Yes.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Move approval of the agreement with the Firefighter Association.
Second. That's a motion by Commissioner O'Brien, seconded by Commissioner Adams. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you, Steve.
Thank you.
Next item is from Utility Services, item 12G1, which is the Collier Creek Estates subdivision petition for water assessment, project utility phases 1, 1A, and 1B. Good morning, Mr. Burke.
Good morning, sir. For the record, Vincent Burke, Director of Utility Services. We have in front of you the Collier Creek Estates subdivision, Resolutions 1, preliminary assessment roll, and Resolution 2, the public hearing date. So just a quick history on how we got here today. There was initial request to look at the feasibility of installing a county water main back in August of 2014. And your county sent a petition package to the point of contact, received a valid petition in March of 2015, and in early April, the Board of County Commissioners approved staff to secure Carter & Associates to do work order for the survey. We brought back an initial update to the board, and we'll show you that on another map where we had one area, but it expanded into a couple areas. So we have, if you will, 3 different areas that have now been combined. So the board back in August added those other 2 areas. We had to get additional surveying areas to incorporate that area to be able to incorporate that into the design. And that's what we have done today. So the initial area was this long strip in the middle here in the black outline. But back in August, the board approved adding what we call Phase 1A off to the left here, almost like an L shape, and Phase 1B. So in total now, the number of parcels within this new area, 141. Those in favor, about 71% for the project. We have preliminary estimated costs of just about $881,000, or per parcel cost on an equitable basis of $6,250. So moving forward, what are the next steps? If the board is to approve this today, we would be approving 2 items. Resolution 1 to do the preliminary assessment roll, and then Resolution 2 to set the public hearing date in March. We are planning to do staff is planning to go up to the Homeowners Association meeting in March 7th of this year, to present the information to the homeowners. And we're going to tentatively set the public hearing date for Tuesday, March 14th at 9:05 a.m. Resolution 3 would be set at that time in the future. We still are going to apply for the FD permit if we get approval today. We're going to apply to the City of Sebastian to get a right-of-way permit to install our water main in their right-of-way. Advertise for bids in the summer of 2017, hopefully get some good numbers, and look to move some dirt to be completed hopefully sometime in May of 2018. So if you look on the agenda packet, we're recommending 2 items. The staff is recommending that the board adopt the resolution number 1, providing for the installation of the water main within utility phases 1, 1A, and 1B of the petition water assessment project for the Collier Creek Estates subdivision, subject to the terms outlined in the attached resolution. The Board of County Commissioners shall establish the applicable interest rate at the time the final assessment roll is approved. Second, the staff recommends that we adopt the resolution setting the time and place for the public hearing on March 14th, 2017. And lastly, if this is approved today, what we will do is we will mail letters to all the property owners, the 141 property owners that would be in this assessment project, letting them know the time and place for the public hearing. We will also let them know what the estimated costs are. We will also do 2 announcements in the paper prior to the public hearing, and staff will attend the meeting to the homeowners on March 7th, and we are tentatively set to address the City of Sebastian City Council on February 8th at their meeting, just to inform the council that some of their residents will be part of this project. And without further ado, I'm available for any questions should the board have any.
Thank you. Commissioners, any questions of staff? Fine presentation, Vinnie.
Thank you, sir.
With that, is there anybody in the public that wishes to speak regarding this matter? They'll be speaking when they receive the letters, I'm sure, as we've heard in the past. Just a slight anticipation. All right, well,
Mr. Chairman, I'd be happy to move the staff recommendation, including the adoption of the resolution providing for the installation of the water main within utility phases 1, 1A, and 1B of the petition water assessment project for Collier Creek subdivision, and to adopt the resolution setting the time and place for the public hearing, March 14th, 2017 at 9:05 a.m.
second. Madam Clerk, that's clear? Thank you. Myself. That's a motion by Commissioner Solari, seconded by myself. And any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you. Item 12G2 is the West Lakes Estates subdivision petition water assessment project. Request for authorization for the Department of Utility Services to proceed with engineering design services and retain Carter and Associates for surveying services. Once again, Vinnie Burke.
Thank you, Commissioner. In the attached backup, we have a map showing this area. We have 21 parcels that are in the subdivision, but 18 would be benefiting. If you see on the right-hand part of the screen, you have 2 houses within the subdivision, but they're currently served. They would not be considered benefiting property, but the yellow border as the folks that have come with the valid petition. So we're looking for approval to move ahead now that we have the necessary signatures from those folks who would like to have county water in that area to hire a survey firm for $11,670 to do the survey in and around that area to get the topographic information and to get the location of the existing water services so that we can design this project moving forward. So staff recommends that the Board of County Commissioners approve attached work order number 1 with Carter and Associates, part of the continuing service firm, for a lump sum amount of $11,670, and authorize the chairman to execute the same as presented, and authorize staff to move ahead with the project in the design phase once we get back the survey information. I'm available for any questions, board.
Thank you, Vinnie. Any questions of staff? Vinnie, it looks like you're 2 for 2 on the informational.
Thank you, sir.
Is there anybody in the public that wishes to speak regarding this matter? Commissioners?
I move staff's recommendation.
Second.
That's a motion by Commissioner Adams, seconded by Commissioner Zorc. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries unanimously.
Thank you.
The next item, we'll turn it over to County Attorney Matters. The first item is are we prepared for the amending? Or
Yes, we have both county attorney staff and we have community development staff here for item 13A.
then we'll proceed with the amending of the 2017 state legislative program to include legislation relating to the Florida Building Commission to the county's list of concerns. Good morning, Counselor.
Good morning. For the record, Kate Cotner, Assistant County Attorney, and I have with me Scott McAdams, the building official for Indian River County. Just wanted to put something on your radar for a point of discussion. There is a proposed committee bill that's in the Florida legislature right now that has to do with the Florida Building Commission. And so my understanding, and Scott I'm sure can correct me on this, but my understanding is that currently every 3 years the Florida Building Code is looked at, reviewed, and updated to be consistent with the national standard. And there is this proposed committee bill which would amend that. And it's basically suggesting that instead of every 3 years having a mandatory update of a Florida Building Code, it would change to be every 6 years, 5 or 6 years that they would review, and you're welcome to come up here, Scott. Every 5 or 6 years that they would review the Florida Building Code to see if it's consistent and only adopt those things those measures that they found to be significant and not adopt the things that they found to be insignificant. And while we, in general, don't have really an issue with this because it's outside of our realm, what we are concerned about is unintended consequences of what how the county could be impacted. And some of those unintended consequences include if there is an event such as a natural disaster and we need to have FEMA money and our Florida building code is not consistent with the national standards, then we might not be eligible for the FEMA money. It's a potential. It's not saying that it's going to happen. It's really being workshopped right now. And I just wanted to bring it to the board's attention to see if you wanted to take a position on this matter, because then we could be involved in the workshopping. And Scott, if you would like to, I know that there's the Florida Association of Building Officials. Is also taking a position.
Good morning, Scott McAdam, building official. Yes,
morning, Scott.
the organization that I'm part of is the Building Official Association of Florida, and we're deep into this topic here. It's sort of fluid. It's been out for a week. Today at 10 o'clock actually is one of the committee meetings to discuss it, so it's going to be televised, so I'm going to go back there and watch it. But the main gist of it is before the Florida Building Code, there were 4 different codes in the state of Florida. They worked to get to the Florida Building Code, so it would be one document for the whole state. And South Florida Building Code was incorporated into the Florida Building Code. And then right after the 2001 Florida Building Code, they went to the base as being the International Building Code. So at this point in time, every state in the United States has the International Building Code as its base. And we went in that direction for the base. This proposal, just to correct one issue, they're not talking about changing the code cycle from 3 years to 6 years. It'll still be 3 years. But the proposal is to take the base of the International Building Code, which is national, and go with the Florida Building Code. They're indicating that the Florida Building Code's been around now for 5 different code cycles, and in December, the 6th edition will be out. They want to take the 6th edition and no longer go back to the International for the base, take that 6th edition and use that as the base. So that's really the gist of it. There's a bunch of organizations that are teaming up sort of against it. The home builders are the big organization that put this bill together. And they're for it, and for some reasons that seem, pretty, tempting and so forth, because no one really likes a lot of changes. So right now, the process takes 2 years for the International Code to change, and it's committees, it's advisory committees, TAC committees, for all the different codes. It's not just the building code. It'll be electrical code, gas code, mechanical code, and so forth, plumbing code. So it's a big volume set. So it goes through rigorous 2 years, public, anyone can put in comments. The final vote is only governmental, like building officials, people in charge of regulating the code. So that process has been great, it's been proven. I said the whole nation's under it. And then what Florida does, they take that and use it as a base, and then they go through the Florida Building Commission that then goes through changes that they want to do with the base code. So that's another process of being evaluated. What do we want in the code? What we don't want in the code? So going to the Florida Building Code as the base has some possible ramifications. One big one is ICC has the whole code volume set copyrighted. They offer the test right now, so there's some of that type of stuff. We'd have to create our own code or so forth. And then, like Kate mentioned, ISO, we get rated as a building department, just like the fire department gets rated by ISO, and we have a good standing right now. And they want you to go to the latest and greatest international codes, so that could be jeopardized possibly. And maybe there's a fix for that. And then any kind of FEMA recovery funds, renovations and so forth, that's mandated by the federal government to use the latest and greatest ICC international codes. So just those types of things are some issues that we have, and there's a better way to make the changes that the home builders would like to have than to change the base code. We want to stay with the country. We don't want to start moving away from the country. Took us a long time to get everybody in the country all under the base code as in the national code. So, any other questions or so forth? Because I can keep babbling on about what it's all about, but it's fluid.
No, you're not babbling. I mean, you're educating. Scott, I just want to say that now this thing is a week old,
Yes.
and the nexus is, why are we going this direction? Why are they wanting to go in this direction? You said it was tempting, but
Right.
do you see any justification for this?
Well, I do. You know, so with any kind of regulation, you're always going to have people for and against. If I'm a builder and I have 300 homes in my subdivision, and I've permitted half of those maybe under one code, and now the other half is under another code, and maybe one simple code change was maybe a requirement for a ground fault receptacle, now required to be in a certain area that it wasn't with those other half homes. You know, and if I have 4 of those in each home, add those up, it's cost, I need to know about the code change. And that's one thing that they're indicating, that it's tough to keep up with the code changes. That's one of their positions. But we do a great job throughout the state. There's books about the code changes, there's classes. Indian River County offered their own class that we put on with 200 people there. But it is tough. You're changing your business model that before I didn't have to have a certain item. So then the other argument is some of the stuff is really being pushed by some of the manufacturers. I want my product in the code. And some of that's true. But that is vetted all the way through. And like I said, the last final vote, if something gets in the base code, is through building officials. So if someone's trying to push a product, you know, it gets vetted, and building official is not going to want some sort of silly thing. But you can take any code, and the volumes I explained, there's a bunch of regulations in there, and you can pick out one item and say, that sort of is silly. I don't really understand why that's in there, but it has been vetted. You know, people bring up sprinkler systems. Every time there's a code change, there's more and more buildings want to be sprinkled. You sprinkle something, and you get so many less stringent criteria. You know, so that's one thing. So Florida, every year, for the past number of years, when they do a code change, and the base code says single-family homes need to be sprinkled. Florida always says we disagree with that. We take that out, and a single-family home doesn't have to be. So things like that you can debate back and forth, but the issue of the base code being international or the base code being Florida, that's the big issue. We want to stay international, and the system is set up great through ICC, code change process, and the Florida Building Commission code change process. And you really need to be involved. You can do it, I can put my comments in there, I can vote from my desk in here. There's access, I don't have to go because it's international. Sometimes the meetings are in Wisconsin, could be in Texas and so forth. I don't have to go there. I can get involved and I can vote, and everyone else can put amendments in. A person from the public, anybody. It's not restricted to who can propose changes. And that's why it's vetted for 2 years, and there's so many committee and TAC meetings. So I think the process that we have is good. I would make a comment that I think the home builders need to get involved with code changes and in fighting with Tallahassee through the Florida Building Commission for the things that they want in and want out. And the last code change is really what brought a lot of this about, is for a code change, they didn't get really involved, and some things were put in there. You might have remembered there's an issue about distances between buildings. What happened was we went international, which increased those dimensions and basically changed the whole sort of philosophy. What they did was they missed taking that out and putting in what the old code used to say. So a few months into the new code, they went to the legislator and they changed that, went back to the old. So some of those issues, you know, sort of drive them nuts a little bit. But be involved, and we have a great process. No need to change it. And if you are going to change it, you could change maybe some of the process. One thing is, through the Florida Building Commission, if you want to make a code change, it's 75% of the vote, so it's a super majority. You could change that to 2/3 maybe. I mean, so there could be other changes for, you know, code changes to be done a little bit differently, but not changing the base.
Well, it sounds like after you spoke a little further, it sounds like that this would be a cumbersome process and might not be exactly in the best interest of all of us, not only here in Indian River County, but for the state of Florida. And your organization, your association is taking an aggressive stance on this.
Right.
And we appreciate what you do, and all of our building inspectors and county officials and engineers. And as far as for home building in the future, I feel that if you're comfortable with it and we're producing a good product and certifying a good product under the standards that have been achieved over the years, I think we should continue that as well. So I would be fully in support of any efforts of authorizing our county attorney to add that to the list of matters that we pay close attention to and take a stance on. But I can't make that motion.
Mr. Chairman, I have a little different idea on this.
Yes.
And I don't think we should add this to the list of our priorities yet. I'd like to know more about it over the next few weeks. I tend to think, unlike Scott, I tend to think that there are more problems in the Florida Building Code than Scott enunciated, and I am still biased by the manual J calculation, which came in the Florida Building Code, and I found it to be just the most ridiculous thing that somebody got in there. So that, you know, you mentioned some manufacturers put things in there, and they end up sometimes getting stuck in there. I understand the manual J has been taken out, but that process is problematic for me. And I tend to think that the reason the bill was probably brought up is because somebody came across a number of these little problems and didn't have the right means for him or their organization to get them out. And one of the things for me that's happened over the last years with the Florida Building Code is that on the understanding the need for safety, especially after the Miami Homestead hurricanes, the bias was to add every safety item. But one of the problems with that is that the cost of housing is becoming so expensive that we are totally pricing out low-income housing. And it leaves a pretty decent strata of our population unable to get homes. And a recent case that came before me was a $350,000 cost to build a duplex for vets, and $60,000 of it was for a sprinkler system. And I'm not blaming that on the Florida Building Code, but I find that incredibly problematic. So I'd be very happy to have our attorney monitor this, and if she can, continue to educate this. But I tend to think that the legislation might be beneficial in the sense that a lot of things happen during the process, and perhaps some good things in horse trading can be done that will end up not sacrificing the Florida Building Code and keeping you happy in the sense that we're not doing anything which would lead to great unintended consequences, but will put us on a path to address some of these other problems, which, again, I haven't followed the Florida Building Code that closely, but I haven't heard things about them being fixed. And so I tend to think that a good, solid review of something like this from time to time is probably a positive. So that would be where I am on this today, Mr. Chairman.
And I appreciate your comments as far as the possibility. This is only a week old, but by the same token, it might pick up momentum real quick. And you know, I think we have to be on guard, and I think we have to err on the side of caution on this one. You brought up the manual J calculations. I think that kept a lot of people sweating a lot longer because of the imposed regulations of the complete system and the assessment and calculations, and it complicated the process of people having affordable air conditioning. And I think that was, I for one, I'll tell you that I was in that position, and when I was told that I had to have everything calculated in a complete system, and the CFIs had to be in concert with the cooling mechanism, the price skyrocketed. And fortunately, it was resolved, but it was costly. So I'm very concerned about the regulations that have those unintended consequences. Is there anyone else?
Mr. Chairman.
Look, Commissioner O'Brien.
Commissioner O'Brien.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think kind of more from a technical point that if we really want to follow this, we do need to add it to our list so that then Kate can direct lobbying team to make it, on their list of things that they follow. And really what staff is asking is for our position to be opposed to any legislation which would change the Florida Building Code to negatively impact the local government's ability to receive federal emergency funding. I think if we just, at least for now, stick to that aspect of it, I don't have any problem, putting this on our priority list. And then as it evolves, we can look at other things with the code, whether they're actually improving it, as Scott alluded to. I think we want to make sure we maintain the integrity of the code, but certainly if there are ways to improve it, we can. But I think right now with what staff is just asking to add it to make sure that no harm comes to us, and I don't have a problem adding it to our list for that reason.
Thank you, Commissioner O'Brien.
And if I may, I just want to make a distinction between our priority list and our program list, because we changed that and we limited the number of priorities, but we have a number of other things on the program which the county attorney is following. And I have no problem having it added to the program, which is among the things we follow, but I have no desire to make the staff recommendation a priority at this time.
Right, it was to be added to the list of concerns.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
But
Mhm.
Commissioner O'Brien used the word priority, and I just want to make that distinction clear to everyone, at least for where I am on this.
Absolutely.
So, list of concerns, put it on the heavy watch list.
Well, exactly, but it also allows us to be engaged in that conversation, because like you said, it's a week old, and it's being workshopped right now. And that's why we can ask these questions of, does it impact their ability to receive emergency funding? Or I believe it also came up as far as like the flood risk as well, and our credit rating. So that might be something, and I'm looking to Jason to help with maybe some language to add to the end of that to make sure we include everything that could be.
Right. I think the ISO rating and the flood rating are the concerns, and I think it's important to. We're not trying to oppose the bill. We understand and support the idea behind the bill. We're just wanting to make sure that the bill doesn't endanger the flood rating, the FEMA funding, and the ISO ratings, and that just gives us the opportunity to maybe shake that bill. And as Kate said, it's a proposed committee bill. There's a committee meeting this morning on it, and it gives us the ability to make some recommended changes to improve the bill, because we think we can. We think there's a way to get there where the builders want to go that won't jeopardize those things. So we can support that. It's just to be able to enter into that discussion.
And you can have a good sense of where this bill might be going, but as we know, what happens in Tallahassee is that a bill can go terminal after a year's efforts, and it also can go viral in 1 week.
Right.
So, without that knowing where it's going and hearing our building officials' concerns as well as yours, I don't see why we would not want to put this on the heavy watch list, and if we need to go further, then just come on back and we'll have to go further, and maybe it may have to go on to a priority list.
In the future.
But for now, it definitely should have a radar reading. But
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank all the other commissioners for their concern about this. Is one that's near to my heart. Scott, is the local Treasure Coast building officials, have they taken any, I think all the counties should be doing what we're doing so that we're watching this, but have they, as that group, made any particular positions or statements?
Not that I know of. What happened is I knew this was coming. We just didn't know when they were going to submit it. So they submitted it last Friday.
Okay, so.
And last Thursday was their breakfast that I go to every month, and I brought it to their attention. So I don't know what their position is.
Okay. And Kate, if this does pass, this would also be one of the items that we would get as updates as you hear of information that you can share with us so we know.
Absolutely.
To keep it as a concern, or does it elevate to a priority? But thank you for bringing this forward.
Thank you. Commissioner Adams?
I move we add this to our list of concerns and monitor it as it moves through the legislative process so it doesn't
Second.
negatively impact us.
I have a motion by Commissioner Adams and seconded by myself. Any further discussion? Anybody from the audience wishing to speak regarding this matter? Seeing none? Commissioners? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you. Appreciate the presentation and update from our building official as well. Next item on the agenda is the report on the demolition of unsafe structures. Councilor DeBrawl.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Commissioners, Bill DeBrawl on behalf of the County Attorney's Office. Ways back, the board asked for a report on demolition of dilapidated structures. That's what we went ahead and brought back to the board. We pulled about 55 files as far as past demolitions stemming all the way back into the 1990s. The majority of the demolitions have been in the last 16 years, as you can see. Of the 55, about 40% of them have paid I'm sorry, about 20% have paid. The majority of them are still vacant. The problem with these type of lots is that they're usually small, 50 feet wide, and it's kind of difficult to build a structure on a lot that's 50 feet wide because there is no water or sewer service. Therefore, you have to have your septic at one far end of the property and your well at the other far end of the property. And it's simply not feasible to rehab the properties or anything like that. I submit the information for your consideration. I'd be happy to try and answer any questions that you might have.
Mr. Chairman, I have a
Yes.
couple questions of Bill. When we have some of these that had demolition and then through somebody purchasing a series of tax deeds and then has taken the property over, our lien is still there through that process?
No, our lien gets scrubbed out in the tax deed process. So
On the demolition side?
We lose that, yes.
So on Gifford Garden Apartments, I know they had approached us a year or so ago about entertaining a lower offer, but if it got scrubbed in that process, why would they have come forward to make an offer on something that they aren't obligated to pay?
Because I don't think it had been through the process yet. They were just considering it.
Oh, okay, I see. Because on some of these, if we're ever in the position where it's in a environment where we could perfect the lien and foreclose and then at least offer it to Habitat or Every Dream Has a Price, or get it into our ownership side, but these liens that sit out there sort of forever, I don't know how we could clean some of them up if it would make sense to or not, but that would be up to your recommendation.
It'd be difficult. It'd be a challenge. Like I said, if there is no water service to a lot of these, so they'd have to sink a well, they'd have to put in the septic because there's no sewer service. With the lot size restrictions, it's difficult. We tried several years ago offering some of these to the not-for-profits. We had one successful rehab of the property because it was a larger lot. The other ones were returned to us for the most part by the not-for-profits that took title to them, simply because they didn't have the means to develop them, and that wasn't feasible to develop.
Right. Okay. All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Anything further?
Just along those lines, Bill, then, is there anything we can do in our code to make those lots more attractive, say, to an adjoining property owner where there is a house? Like, could we change it and allow a detached garage to be built on it, or give it some use that has value to maybe a adjoining home that's already built?
Yes, I suppose we could change our code to do that. What we've done in the past with the smaller strips, the remnant strips, we have sought abandonment of them and gone ahead and offered them to adjoining landowners if they want to take them over or purchase them at a nominal value. The other thing that we've done is we've declared the lot surplus and then gone out to auction. That has not been as successful as we would have hoped. I think part of the problem with that, when we've declared them surplus and then gone ahead and sold them at auction, was that they weren't combined with the sheriff's and the county's surplus property auctions, that there is not a very large pool of bidders available. I think we only had a handful the last time we tried selling them off as surplus lots. So, you know, we could, if it would be an adjoining lot, and Stan could support me on this, as far as accessory structures on that. So, Stan.
Right. Mr. Chairman,
Yes,
just
sir.
for the record, Stan Bowling, Community Development Director. Our codes now would allow a single-family homeowner acquiring an adjacent property, even if it was a small property. They could do a unity of title and then have a number of accessory structures, a garage and workspace, even an accessory dwelling unit, as long as they have the proper, health department clearances for any kind of septic or well service. So we do allow those properties to be joined and accessory uses to go on them. So our codes are flexible already and allow for that. It's just difficult for these deals to get put together, as we've seen over the years. That's the problem.
All right. Thank you, Stan. Thank you, Bill.
Thank you. Well, is there anybody from the public who wishes to look at further clarification or discussion? Commissioners?
I think this is just no action needed, so I'm good to move on.
Further?
Nope.
Thank you.
To the Commission, if I may, I know Bill DeBrawl and Christina Moore in our office spent a lot of time doing the research, as Mr. DeBrawl stated, going back many, many years through a lot of different files. So I just want to thank them both for taking the time to go through
Yes,
this.
thank you, Counselor. Appreciate that. The next item, 13C, has been resolved at this point, and we'll move on to 13D, which is a presentation by our county attorney for open government.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to provide a brief kind of overview of Sunshine Law and Public Records Law, both for this board, but I thought it might be helpful also for the public to hear some of the issues. I've done this for a couple of our boards, like the Tourist Development Council. First off, there's sort of two open government law statutes that are involved. One is the Sunshine Law, and one is the Public Records Law. So the Public Records Law really addresses the meetings, or the Sunshine Law addresses the meetings, and then the Public Records Law really addresses the documents and the things. So essentially, under the Sunshine Law, it provides a right of access to governmental meetings and proceedings of governmental boards. So this not only deals with and addresses the Board of County Commissioners, but also addresses some of the boards that county commissioners may sit on as members, for instance, like the Tourist Development Council. And there are just three very simple requirements. One, meetings need to be open to the public. There needs to be notice of those meetings, and then there needs to be minutes that are promptly taken of those meetings. So I always look at it as the ability for a full ability for public transparency is that these meetings, one, first, if someone's going to show up to the meeting, they need to know the meeting's going to happen, so they need to have notice. And then, for instance, if someone can't show up to the meeting, but they want to know what happened, that's why you have minutes. And then obviously for someone, needs to be able to attend those meetings for transparency purposes, and therefore people need to be able to attend those meetings. So that's why you have notice, attending the meetings, and then minutes of those meetings. Now, there are three elements of the Sunshine Law. They govern gatherings of 2 or more members of the same board to discuss a matter which would reasonably foreseeably come before that board. So I'll break this down very quickly. 2 or more members of the same board. So it sounds issue, but in fact, actually, there could be an issue where 2 commissioners aren't talking to each other, but there may be an issue of someone serving as the conduit. So for instance, Commissioner Zork isn't going to come up to me, as he knows, and say, hey, I want you to make sure that you tell Commissioner Adams that this is how I'm going to vote on Tuesday. That would be me serving as a conduit for that discussion.
Could you use Commissioner Solari in lieu of me? No.
I'm sorry, you two just happen to be sitting next to me. I'll make sure I shift it to the other side of the room for another example. So for instance, the 2 wouldn't have directly talked with each other, but I would have served as a conduit, and obviously that can't happen. And then you focus on the same board. So Commissioner Solari may wish to talk to somebody who is on the Planning and Zoning Commission.
Paybacks are hell, Dylan, remember that.
Those are two, Commissioner Solari is on the Board of County Commissioners. Someone like Alan Plakowicz, for instance, if he was talking to, is on the Planning and Zoning Commission. They're two separate boards. Therefore, the Sunshine Law does not apply. Now, it also deals with the issue of maybe different governments. So one of the commissioners up here, so I'll go down the list, Commissioner O'Brien, may be talking with City Council member Dick Winger over at the City of Vero Beach. Now, they're both elected officials and they're both sort of the heads of part of the heads of their boards, but they're different governmental units. One is the city, one is the county. Now, the one issue that I do want to point out to the board and others is that those board members and council members may be members of other boards, governmental boards together. So for instance, the Metropolitan Planning Organization is an example where various different elected officials come together from various different local governmental entities and sit together as part of a board. In that example, if they were talking about something that reasonably foreseeably may come before the MPO, they would be subject to the Sunshine Law. And finally, different counties. So maybe the chair, Commissioner Flesher, is talking with someone from Palm Beach County about an item. Commissioner, completely separate boards, although they are both county commissioners, not subject to the Sunshine Law. Again, to the caveat, always need to keep in mind you may be a member of a similar board. So the Treasure Coast Regional Planning Council, if you are both members of the Treasure Coast Regional Planning Council, then you need to consider whether you're talking about something that would reasonably foreseeably come before that board. And then the last item we talked about, so we talked about 2 or more members, we talked about same board, finally reasonably foreseeably come before the board for a vote. So for instance, I always say you can talk about your kids, you can talk about your activities at church or other leadership groups, you can talk about the Super Bowl that's coming up in 2 weeks. I don't think you're going to be voting on those items up here on the dais. Don't need to run from each other, hide from each other at Publix. But nonetheless, if it is going to be something that you could talk about in a non-traditional forum, like a workshop or maybe an informal discussion, it needs to be subject to the Sunshine Law. Now, I always give examples, not just to this board and other boards, of just kind of ideas of pitfalls. And I know the commissioners who have been serving on Sunshine Law bodies for years don't say these things, but I always state the infamous ones you've sometimes heard are, hey, well, why don't we just talk about this after the meeting? That's just directing everyone to know that you're going to have a Sunshine Law violation. I have an open door policy that may be fine with the public, but not for each other. And then, you know, other social settings, like I mentioned, you bump into each other at Publix or you bump into each other at a Taxpayers Association meeting, that's fine. I do want to note, and this is a concern because it is spreading across the state, emails, Facebook posts, text messages. Just the general consensus has been to avoid those types of communications about county business. The issue really becomes a matter of public retention and the ability for us to gather those in the event there is a public records request. For instance, we control our county's Facebook page, we control our county's IRC.gov email addresses, but if communications are happening on your own personal devices or on that are county business related, it just makes it harder for us to be able to maintain and control those and make sure that we are responding to public records requests. Public records law, I will just say that it's extremely broad as to what a public record is under the statute. I'd read it, but it's a paragraph long. Essentially, the Florida Supreme Court has advised us that all materials that are made or received by the agency in connection with public business, which are used to perpetuate, formalize, and communicate knowledge, would be deemed a public record. So some of the keys, we kind of talked about social media already and text messages. Some examples of things that may sound like things that might not be public records. Drafts is a great example. If I slap a draft on my document that I'm working on, that doesn't mean, oh my God, it's not public record. Now, if I haven't shown it to anybody, or if you're a commissioner and you're working on a draft and you haven't distributed it, communicated it to anybody else, not a public record yet. But the second, for instance, I say, hey, Jason Brown, County Administrator, I wanted to let you know here's a copy of my agenda item that I'm thinking of bringing to the board. What do you think about it? It's now public record.
Can I ask a question on that one?
Absolutely.
If you remember about a year and a half ago, we all got a request to submit any lists that we maintain for communicating with constituents. And I was in the process of building a list for lagoon contacts, and I had not utilized the list, but it still seemed to fall subject to that, and it went with everybody else's, whoever else had any list for mailing. Even though I hadn't used it yet, it seemed that fell under that, and it was still being developed.
Well, and the idea there is you hadn't used it yet. So you may not have used it yet, but if you were, and again, and one thing I didn't state is that the Florida Supreme Court has made it very clear when you're analyzing an issue, whether it regards to sunshine law or public records law, you are supposed to review it in light of any ambiguity, in light of being open and transparent. Is you may not have used it yet, but if a commissioner in that example had distributed it to or was using it with or to your aide, for instance. So if you had provided it to either any of your aides, then it becomes sort of circulated at that point.
And that's probably where that.
Yeah, and that's where it came. But notes to yourself that you've written down, like I oftentimes write in my little legal pad, just notes of the things that I need to do today. I'm not really sharing those with anybody. I'm not, distributing it to Jason. Those are fine. Those are technically not public records under the public records law. Back to sort of the text message, Facebook, email issue. It's a really interesting discussion. And I know the board's educated on this topic, but a lot of people are not aware of it. The device that is used is not the measure of whether it's a public record or not. So for instance, I always give this. I'm on my computer upstairs. I'm using my IRCGov.com account. And I text my wife, hey baby, I'm going to be on my way home from, after I come home from the gym, I'm going to swing on by Publix and get something. Do you need anything? XOXO. It came from my IRCGov.com account. It had nothing to do with public business. It had to do with what I need to make sure I bring home before dinner time. It's, again, although it came from a governmental source, it had nothing to do with public business. The Supreme Court has told us the opposite of that is just as true. So I'm maybe out of town on the weekend. I happen to pick up my cell phone and I happen to write something for my Gmail account. And I say, Commissioner Adams, I just wanted you to know that I was looking over the Fellsmere City Council website and I saw this on the agenda, wanted you to know about it. I know we had spoken about it earlier. I can't use as the defense, oh, that came from my Gmail account, therefore it's not a public record. The issue that the courts are going to look at is what was the subject of that communication. So that would be captured. Public records can be made verbally. They don't have to be made in writing. In fact, I remember one of the county commissioners, it might have actually been Commissioner Davis at the meeting, who one time heard from the dais someone who made a public records request. And the commissioner made a specific point of saying, we heard your public records request and we'll make sure we process that. There is a process by which you acknowledge requests and respond to them, but I thought it was a really good example of how public records requests can be made verbally. You cannot ask who they are or what their purpose is for asking for them. It's simply if someone walks in and says, I'd like a copy of a document and it's public record and there aren't any exemptions, certainly by all means, we have to turn it over. Now, I would like to say that there are some, as I was alluding to there are some reasons why we can't give up a public record. So there are exemptions under the statute and there are confidential rules under the statute. Great example is Social Security numbers. I may have a list of Social Security numbers, or department may. Florida statutes have made that very clear. Social Security numbers are exempt and confidential. I would redact those out on any public records request we're responding to. So if a commissioner, you get a public records request, make sure you just keep us in the loop. You don't need us necessarily to respond to it, but it helps in case there was an issue of confidentiality or an exemption. Finally, there's a reasonableness to respond to public records. Someone could walk in and say, I'd like a copy of the agenda. Well, that should be pretty easy. I should be able to hand it to him that there's a stack and say, here you go. Now, someone may walk in and say, I want a copy of everything in, I think I've said everything in Jason Brown's office, then that's an example of something that's probably going to take a little time to sort through and gather. So it's just a reasonableness standard in responding. Just a couple other issues I want to talk of that we've talked about: open government and being transparent. And a part of that is working with your constituents, meeting with citizens, talking with anybody who raises an issue. Just as a reminder to the board, there are a couple times where actually we don't like to be so open in meetings. And those three examples are quasi-judicial items. we discourage. A quasi-judicial item is an example where the board is taking an action on something where they're applying the facts that are presented at a hearing to the law that we have. And in the exact example, any communications outside of the public hearing process are deemed to be ex parte communications. Because the commissioners are acting, you commissioners are acting as almost like judges ruling on the issues that are presented. So in those issues, we actually discourage communications between the commissioners and the public. Thus, if anyone ever finds out that, oh my gosh, I wanted to meet with one of the commissioners and they said no, this is probably one of those reasons. Another one is employee issues. Oftentimes, board members, you will have an employee that comes to you, they're a constituent. It's your responsibility to listen to constituents, but I would caution on employee issues. They may be an employee who's under a collective bargaining agreement, so there may be some concerns there. And just broadly under our code, we discourage board interactions and involvement in sort of employee relations. So if you've got an employee issue, I highly recommend you turn that over to HR or a department head. And finally, on procurement issues. We have in our procurement manual, we've got a cone of silence now that's been implemented. So when we have an RFP, RFQ, a bid, some sort of procurement package that's out on the street, it's just best to stay out of that. We encourage, I think Jennifer Hyde now has been preparing a list of cone of silence items so that the board, the commissioners are aware of them. That just makes sure that we're not putting the thumb on the scale to favor one side or another. We let the procurement process roll and roll through its process. And finally, just in general in those issues, just helps that if there is a procurement issue or procurement process, just always a general concern, and there may be exceptions to the rule, but just concerns on those types of issues in terms of, again, putting the scale down toward one group or another. And it's best just to easier hand that off to the not HR, this example, procurement in this example, and that way every company or other agency or entity has a fair shot at being a part of the procurement process and getting awarded a procurement issue. And finally, just want to wrap up, we do have ethics training now that's required under the Ford statute. It simply involves education on sunshine law, public records law, various ethics laws, including, for instance, voting conflicts. And that needs to be done every year by December 31st. So that's just sunshine law, public records law, ethics training, and just some other sort of different governmental relations issues. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Counselor, thank you. Any questions of council?
Yeah, one thing, Mr. Chairman. Dylan, you and I had talked earlier about our positions as liaisons to certain committees, and I'm still, I don't think, this is where I agree with what you'd said, the Attorney General said, and just as an example, I'm the county liaison to the Economic Development Council. So if we take your outline for the Sunshine Law, 2 members of the same board. If I look at, under our ordinance on our website, and there's a list of members, and it's one representative from this, blah, 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 nowhere under the membership list does it say a county commissioner liaison. So I think I would argue the point I'm not really a member of that committee. And then the second key part of the Sunshine Law is and the reasonable foreseeable to vote on a matter. Well, I'm the non-voting liaison, so to me, foreseeably, I would never vote on anything at that committee. So, you know, to me, I think that's still a gray area because I think just from that, I'm not a member, I'm non-voting, I should be able to talk to those people outside of the actual public meeting, but just I don't know, I think it's just still a gray area, but I'm not sure liaison falls under sunshine.
Well, and the Attorney General has opined on the issue of members who are non-voting. So for instance, the school board member who sits up on the dais with the Planning and Zoning Commission. Per Florida statute, the school board member is an ex officio non-voting member of the Planning and Zoning Commission. And the opinion and guidance from the Attorney General is that person was subject to sunshine law even though they couldn't vote on the dais. Now, one of the interesting aspects of the issue, which we talked about in terms of the gray area of this discussion, it really boils down to, and a lot of times most of the issues with regarding public records law and sunshine law are going to come down to the intricate facts of the scenario. Happens a little bit more often with the sunshine law and sometimes a lot of the ethics laws, because sometimes there could be a key fact that turns the decision. Part of the analysis is going to be, you know, the involvement of the commissioner in the discussion or the topic. So I could see a very extreme example where a commissioner is the liaison. They show up to the meeting and they sit in the audience and they take notes, and then they come back to the board and say, I just want to let you know I was sitting in on the Beach and Shores Committee meeting and they were talking about the various issues. They weren't really involved in the dialogue as part of the decision-making process. They weren't a part of, obviously they're not voting, but they really weren't part of the discussion. I could really see that as an example of where they were non-voting liaison, just sitting there listening. I think that scales tip in the aspect that they weren't subject to the sunshine law. I think, and I'd be happy to talk further with the Attorney General's office about this issue, but I could see where the Attorney General would come out and say, but if it's on the extreme other side, so for instance, they're sitting on the dais or at the table, they're guiding the discussion, the commissioner or member was really taking an active input different from that who was someone who was sitting in the audience. I could see that being a different set of facts, but I would certainly be happy to make sure that I discuss any particular facts with the commissioner and make sure that we're working with the Attorney General's office to get the right analysis of it.
Councilor, thank you.
One other question, to clarify that, because I kind of agree with Commissioner O'Brien's feelings on that. If you renamed it, that doesn't fix the problem, right? It's the intent of.
Yeah, and it's kind of on the lines of the discussion I had about something coming from my Gmail versus my IRC Gov. Right. They're going to be looking at the context of what's going on versus the what email it came from. Right. So it's going to be a fact question, I think, in terms of that, and I'd be happy to research that and make sure we get some proper guidance from the Attorney General.
Thank you.
You know, and again, I appreciate the presentation. Council and I were speaking, and I felt it was due time. We do get some challenges. We get invites to public meetings, and when you have 2 or more commissioners, I think the citizens are quite surprised that we have to reserve our comments. And we do notify. I want the public to know that we notify our council that there is a public meeting, and we've been invited, and if he understands that 2 of us are invited, we do generally have a discussion with the attorney. It's noticed, and there is public notice requirements if 2 or more commissioners are going to be at a public meeting. And there are no private meetings. And I think it was time that the public be reminded as to the requirements. As Council stated, we all have to affirm that we've taken the ethics class on an annual basis. It is several hours long, and it's a commitment that we have to do to ensure the public trust that we are not, that we understand and fully understand the requirements of open government and the Sunshine Law and ethics. I just want to quickly, Council, I just want to give a couple examples. Susan Adams, Commissioner Adams, and I served on the Tourist Development Council. And in addition, Commissioner Adams, then Council Member Adams, we had the opportunity to discuss matters in Fellsmere, and I have to tell you that it's all about perception. And that's the key for me to respond to the assertions, is that we could be speaking about the Fellsmere issues when Commissioner Adams was Councilmember Adams, but the very next day we're sitting on the same board next to each other in the TDC. So in order to ensure that perception was what it was, we truly didn't speak on any matters to ensure that we had that arm's length distance and did not have any appearances of impropriety or violation of the Sunshine Law or discussion. And the other one, and thank you for that in the past and in the current and present tense, Commissioner. The other item was that then Commissioner Davis and I both had sons at Sebastian River High School. Ironically, Wesley S. Davis took the opportunity to name his son Wesley S. Davis, and I took the opportunity to name my son Joseph Edward Flesher. And you can understand that there would be some concern when we both served on the same booster or chaperone committee for both of our sons who were on the same team, going on the same trip, where we had to isolate ourselves, be in a stadium that we were opposite each other. Because I'll tell you what, if you want to know about perception, the entire audience, they might have been watching the game, but there was quite a few that were watching us. So we ensured that we were on opposite sides of the field. We might have waved to each other, but there was no communication, perceived or otherwise. So it's just something that affects our daily lives, and I don't know if there's any other anecdotes, but I wanted to ensure that the public knew how much attention to detail there was to our ethical awareness. In addition, Councilor did not state that he spends an awful lot of time in this building and flurrying about many of the issues, and in doing so, I think that we have a great guardian with our general counsel as well, and all our attorneys. But thank you for that, and I appreciate your patience with the presentation as well. Any further discussion from our board regarding this while we're before the cameras and open discussion? Well, with that, we will take a 5-minute recess. Thank you. Order. Next item on the agenda is an emergency item by Commissioner Zorc. Commissioner Zorc.
Yes, good morning. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is a time-sensitive nature involving a company, Alliance Bioenergy, that has made a purchase offer to purchase the old INEOS facility. As part of them going through the due diligence on both the buyer and the seller side, the question of what we'd call the old INEOS feedstock agreement came into question, is how, if their contract is approved through the USDA and the other lender partners, is what mechanism would be in place that the processed material would end up going back to be used at the INEOS facility site as it was in the past. A couple other things I'll mention. We do have a representative of Alliance Bioenergy that's here with us this morning. The company's not asking for any financial contributions. This is more of a cooperative agreement to where they would have access, instead of the county paying to ship the chipped process over to Polk County where we used to ship it, it may go to another facility. Is that instead of the processed material going out of county, it would go to the other side of the yard to where the INEOS facility is at. As part of their agreement, again, going through the purchase due diligence side and the seller's due diligence side, having some mechanism to allow the transfer or the transition of that material to remain on site and be used at the INEOS. And I have to, at some point, refer to it as not the INEOS site, because it, hopefully, if things are successful, it'll have a new name to it. And it also would say if there was any other purchaser that came along or somebody else that was going through a due diligence process, this type of agreement would be potentially offer to another buyer. Right now, at the moment, I think you're the only company that has a written offer in on them. So this isn't really exclusive. If somebody else came along and said, hey, look, we've done this. So it's not a exclusive type agreement. At the moment, you're the only applicant asking for what we would call a 90-day option. Notice that upon a notice of 90 days, that the agreement that the county has to remove the material off-site is that the material would remain on-site to be used in the process that you would be using the facility for. We have, if you wouldn't mind, state your name and address for the record so the public knows who you are, and you can add some more information to the request that we have in front of us today.
Sure. My name is Daniel Delager. I am the president and CEO of Alliance Bioenergy. We are located in West Palm Beach, Florida at 400 North Congress Avenue. Our company has the exclusive worldwide rights to a patented technology out of the University of Central Florida. We have developed this process over the last several years at our laboratories and pilot facilities in Longwood, Florida. And we are in negotiations to purchase the former INEOS site to be our first commercial location and demonstration facility. And as part of, as Commissioner Zork mentioned, as part of our funding package, we do need to secure the feedstock for that location, and we're looking to get an option on the processed material. At 90 days notice, we would then take in the feedstock and begin processing it in our facility.
With the information of the item that was in each of the packets and what Daniel has presented here this morning, we're not asking for anything definitive at this time, but what I would like to get is consensus or a motion from the board that we would direct staff to take the request. There was a number of phone calls that have gone back and forth with Dylan and Jason Brown to get what type of wording would need to be in it. There's some, in the last call it was mentioned that we do retain a portion of the processed material for landfill cover and other county uses, to quantify that to go into the agreement, and also some time limitations that if we make the 90-day offer, it's not out there forever. There's a period of time, and if needed, it could be renewed if the USDA is taking longer to go through their process. So so what I'd like to do is make a motion to direct staff to take the discussed item in the prior discussions to develop the 90-day option, notice option to 90-day notice option to modify the process to, no, let me just back up for a minute. Would that be the processed waste stream or the processed yard waste, or just so we identify and call it the correct portion of the agreement?
Right, the mulched or processed yard waste.
Okay. So starting over on the motion, that we would instruct staff to work on a 90-day option agreement to address the mulched yard waste agreement, so that at a point in time when we're provided notice from the then would-be owner, we now are in ownership of the facility. We'd like to put the 90-day rule in effect that instead of you paying to move this material off-site, that we would like to retain it on-site for our process. As for a motion, that's too wordy.
Is this something that's going to come back for the vote on February 7th? So we will get
the drafted version.
Report. So, I mean, all your motion is today is for
Is
us
to get the ball rolling.
Future staff report, so I'll second the motion.
Right. We have a motion by Commissioner Zork and seconded by Commissioner Solari. Commissioner Adams.
Yes, just a few comments. I have no issue with bringing this back and having staff put something together, provided it does not cost the county money and there is specific timeframes where this would be worked out, because we are in a crunch with INEOS moving out. We will have to make some decisions too, and I don't want something to fall through with this, and that's going to snag that process. Beyond that, I do want to address procedurally how this has come to us. My understanding is that all I really know about Alliance is the article that was in 32963, which was published on January 5th, which indicated that there has been some prior conversations with staff, and I think Commissioner Zork visited the facility in West Palm. Since then, there's been 2 other meetings, this being the 3rd. So I would have preferred that this had come to us sooner so we had time to think about it, because I feel we're being rushed without a lot of information. We've had 18-hour notice that this was going to be an agenda item, and the information provided to us was very minimal. I don't like personally to make decisions in that small of a frame of time without having the ability to fully vet the issue. I just don't feel I know enough about it. That being said, I did get the opportunity this morning very quickly to talk to staff, and I think it's something that we can bring back and work through with staff recommendations. But I just think that in the future, the emergency-ness of it, I would have preferred this would put on an earlier agenda as an emergency item so we and staff had more time to work through the process.
I certainly understand. If I might just address that for a moment. This didn't become an issue with our funder until just last week, and that's the only reason it came up the way it did.
Right, and I think the notice that you had sent, or conversation with me, was on Thursday, and at that time I said the agenda for this Tuesday had already been closed.
Correct.
What kind of a time frame are you on? And kind of went back and forth with the lender, and if we waited till the 7th meeting to bring it up and then provide staff to the following meeting to bring it back to get a final document, that could potentially have been at the end of the window that the parties involved needed to have it. So this is to start the process sooner, and we'll have it again at the 7th, and with a full staff review and comment. But I do agree the shortness. And I did say that, you know, this is kind of trying to put in the last minute is sometimes difficult at times, that we like to have the more time. But once you explain the time frame, I said I'd be happy to bring that forward.
And we certainly appreciate that. It was not ideal, I understand.
Thank you.
I have to say that what you've said earlier was very positive, and it sounds like we might be getting a lot more information from you and your organization and your commitment that we did not get from the INEOS group. And I have to say that I have to agree with Commissioner Adams that, you know, maybe we have a little procedural flaw here, but it's something that we can get through. I think that the intended plan, if we had known about it, if we were contacted, again, by the same token, this is an administrative decision. The discussion earlier about procurement comes up in my mind, that this was something that could have been dealt with the county administrator and bringing forward. We did have an agreement with INEOS, and again, just for discussion, early on, and we still do not know what INEOS produced, how much, where, and what the process was, because everything was considered secret scientific material and operations, and we were kept pretty much in the dark. And with that in mind, that's why you might perceive a little bit of extra concern. It has nothing to do with your operation, your intentions, and I want you to know that we're very excited that you're choosing Indian River County, specifically that site, and look forward to the relationship of solving our challenges with vegetative waste. We were told by INEOS representatives that there will be the day where we will be paid for our vegetative waste. And there were trials and tribulations even getting enough resources to them at times, as we were told. But then again, we had no clear knowledge of or explanation of what was taken. Anytime we made a site visit or were invited to a site visit, it was always at more than an arm's length away from any of the facility or plant, and there was that imaginary line drawn that we should not go into that area. It was almost like the Wizard of Oz, but we weren't wearing red shoes. But by the same token, we look forward to, if this goes through and the bank is looking at you and you're looking at us, and I look for a great relationship. I think that the feedstock arrangement could be beneficial to you, your organization, and to the citizens of Indian River County. After all, we do get a lot of vegetative waste, and there is a cost factor involved. The only concern I have is that we make this, it's a tacit commitment, because if there is any further developments with handling our vegetative waste, we have an obligation to the citizens of Indian River County to be able to continue on. So, and I understand that the RFP that involving the vegetative waste was so designed for this type of situation if it did occur. So I'm pleased that you're here, that it's going to happen, and I'm very happy to bring it back with staff, and we'll see what you need in order to ensure that you're looked at favorably, so we can continue the process of you being an Indian River County resident and commercial operator. You do plan on moving here as well,
Well,
right?
Mr. Chairman, I was just going to say thank you very much, and I do plan on moving here personally, and I can tell you that we do have an open door policy with our company. You guys are more than welcome to come visit anytime. We do not run a super secret operation. Our process is mechanical. It is dry in nature. We do not produce cyanide, so there's no reason for an imaginary line that you cannot cross. We are a patented process, so I don't mind sharing it with anybody. They can't steal it or repeat it without violating our patent. It's owned by the state of Florida, the University of Central Florida. We just have the exclusive worldwide license. So if you're going to violate it, you're going to be fighting Pam Bondi, not me, so it's okay. The best thing about our process is that it's created here. We're going to build it here. We're going to run it here. We're going to be building an incubator where the local schools and universities can bring their technologies and their best and brightest, and we're going to be fostering new technologies right here out of Vero Beach. We're going to employ upwards of 200 people when we're all up and running and expanded, and we're looking to make this a technology quarter right here in Indian River.
Well, sir, I have to say that this sounds very refreshing. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Mrs. Laurie.
I just want to note, I don't have the same concerns about this being an emergency item. I don't like emergency items generally, but for me, especially following the sunshine discussion, this was just a way that we could build a consensus.
Sure.
As I understand the motion, we're not voting on anything today. And in reality, we could have not had this public discussion today, in which case a lot of the commissioners wouldn't know anything about this. We never would have had the fine gentleman before us today.
Right.
And staff could have simply put this on the agenda, and I wouldn't have known anything about it until the Friday before the Tuesday meeting. So I actually prefer just having a little discussion in the sunshine, which is the only way we can have a discussion. And for me, this is really more just a heads up on the matter. If this were something we were going to be voting on today with this information, I would have had a significant problem. So I just want to me, it's a real distinction, and I think it's good when we can't be flexible enough not to slow down a process. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
To the commission,
Councilor.
if I may, just so two things. One, there are a number of different items in the agenda backup that I will be working with the gentleman on and incorporating as part of an option agreement. Also, what I think I heard from Commissioner Zork on is we'll incorporate some sort of term so that that option will be in existence for a certain amount of time, and we'll sort through that over the next week or two. One other issue, though, and I heard from the commission on the dais was one of the issues that there'll be more backup as part of an agenda item that comes back. Please understand, from my point of view, I will be happy to work on the option and making sure the option meets the details we talked about. I don't envision this, however, be sorting either a vetting of the company or the process as part of that analysis. This is merely just to try to put together that option, as opposed to like in a local jobs grant program where our office spends a lot of time vetting the entity, doing background checks and those types of things. So I just wanted that to be very clear as part of what will be coming back as the backup at our next meeting.
Yes.
And Mr.
County
Chairman.
Administrator.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So On the agreement, one other item that we didn't discuss yesterday was hurricanes. In the INEOS agreement, there was the ability for, because sometimes we get a huge amount of waste, and there may be the need for the county to take that over, be more than you would want. And that's just one other item that I'd like to have in any agreement going forward. I do want to clarify to everyone the relationship here. Alliance is trying to acquire the site that INEOS owned, and they're working with the bank, and really all the relationship between the county and Alliance is us providing yard waste. So, and that as proposed, Alliance has said they're not asking for any money from the county, and this would be at no cost to the county, which we, in prior situations, we were paying something, so it would be a little bit of a cost savings to the county. So we think it's important to point out the relationship to everyone, because sometimes it's the public and everyone conflates this as some we got questions of, does the county own the property, when INEOS was happening. So I just want to clarify that. So the background checks, as Dylan was talking about, aren't as in depth here, and that is not necessarily needed. If we were giving money to someone, we would need to go further in depth. I think it would be good for us to provide a little bit of financial information to the board before the agreement. Alliance is a publicly traded company, and we can just provide a little synopsis there. I think that would suffice. Do want to mention that we have the RFP out there that we need to continue on with, because we're hopeful that Alliance gets there and everything's done. In case they're not, we've got the RFP there. The RFP has been structured from the beginning to harmonize whether there is an Alliance or someone else or other opportunities there. So we can harmonize this relationship, and we've talked to Daniel about that. So we think we're in a good place there, that the RFP can continue on, and we can award that RFP, and that the two processes can work together. We can have the vendor that's selected in the RFP mulch up the waste, and then we deliver that to Alliance, and it would be a win-win for all of us.
Daniel, thank you for bringing a new playbook to the game. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yep. Daniel, just real quick, I know that when you have a financial purchase like this, when you have a federal agency involved and a bank and maybe a judge and who knows what, these things sometimes can take a very, very long time to go through. Have they given you any indication that they will give you an answer within this 90-day period? Like, have they said, yeah, you know what, by March 1st, we've got an answer for you? Or is this kind of in federal never land?
There is no drop-dead deadline, but this is not in bankruptcy. So we're not dealing with the federal bankruptcy system. It is in the hands of Arbor One Bank, and then the USDA does have sign-off on it. So the process will not be as drawn out as it normally would be if it was a bankruptcy situation. Mm-hmm. There is not a lot of interest in the site because it's very unique and because of its size. So I don't see it being drug out too long. It's definitely going to be a couple months. I mean, there's no way around it. We're not seeking any funding from the government. We're not seeking any backing from the USDA. We're doing this all on our own with private backing. So we're looking to close this thing in 60 to 90 days tops. It's really out of our hands. We're ready to go. So we'll see what happens.
Okay, so your funder is lined up. You'll have the cash available. So if they do say, yeah, we accept your price, you guys can move right to
We have to do some normal due diligence. This obviously is a checklist on the list, like any mortgage type of a deal. We have to have the EPA study done on the well and a couple of other little things, but that's pretty much it.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions?
One last, I would like to say that Helene Castletime from the Chamber had attended some of the other meeting opportunities, and I think she couldn't be here today, but I think by the 7th, I'm sure she'll be in the audience with us at that meeting.
Thank you. Could you please restate your motion so that we can... We've had some discussion since then, and I want to ensure that the clerk has it.
Let's see how the attorney has it.
All right, the motion was to direct staff to draft the 90-day option, including several of the conditions contained within the memo and additional terms concerning the term of the option and the hurricane, bring it back to the board on February 7th. That was a motion by Commissioner Zork and seconded by Commissioner Solari. Did I misstate anything?
that's good.
Yeah, as I understand, we didn't limit staff to anything. We're basically asking staff to
Enabled.
give as good a full report as they can by February 7th.
Thank you. Okay, any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Yes, I apologize. Yes, Mr. Johnson, please.
Bob Johnson, Carlin Subdivision. I agree with Ms. Adams with her comment on the process. I have a concern about the drinking water that's being provided, and there's a well out there, and to the best of my knowledge, it seems like somebody ought to be able to validate the this process to make sure that the drinking water through the use of the well out there is double checked before we allow this to go further. He always says he's going to check it, but he says there's no, in verbal, he says there's no damage going to be done, but I think that we ought to protect our drinking water. Thank you very much.
Is
If I
that
may.
not a health department requirement?
I can address that pretty easy. Our process doesn't produce any waste. We don't use the well. We don't produce any wastewater. We don't put anything in the ground, the air, nothing. There's nothing comes in or out of our process that you couldn't put in your mouth. It's a completely green process, mechanical, and there's nothing goes in the water or the ground or the air. It's pretty simple.
Thank you. Anybody else from the audience? If not, we have a motion by Commissioner Zork and seconded by Commissioner Solari. All in favor?
Aye. Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you again, Dan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Commissioners.
Thank you.
Next item on the agenda is the discussion for the lease of the fire tower on 43rd Avenue and 4th Street with the Historical Society. Counselor, Chief?
Good morning. Good morning, Commissioners. Back in 2008, the county purchased the old Forestry Work Center site at the corner of 4th Street and 43rd Avenue. Most of the buildings were demolished. The 2 single-family residences were torn down. The work center garage type area remained, along with the fire tower and the small office building at the foot of the tower. A few years back, the county was approached by the Historical Society of Indian River County to adopt the area and lease the area for an exhibit where they would install video cameras in the cab of the tower and have that feed then directed down at the base of the tower to the small office area as an exhibit for old-time Florida forest fire fighting, smoke detection, and what can be seen up in the tower at that time. What we've done since that time is Ruth Stanbridge, the county historian, has applied for certain grants on behalf of the Historical Society. She has been successful in that endeavor. They are now ready to come forward and implement their plan, and they're looking for a lease agreement with the county using their nonprofit status. I've drawn together just a basic lease that would provide them with a small parking area and use of the tower and the office building at the foot of the tower. The lease calls for a 10-year term at $1 a year. The tenants would be responsible for all of the utilities and maintenance of the facility, that if there were any school groups that would visit the site where parking would be a consideration, that they would work with emergency services to find a spot to park a bus there or something. They would be responsible for the grounds as far as maintenance is concerned and all other utilities. Since this site is owned by Emergency Services District. I would just remind the board that Emergency Services District funds must be spent on those expenditures only, and there can't be bleed over into any lawn mowing or other assistance that might want to be requested or lended out to the nonprofit in this situation. So staff's recommendation is to go ahead and take a look at the lease. If there are any modifications that are necessary, to direct staff accordingly and approve the lease with the Historical Society. If there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Thank you, Councilor. Any questions of council?
I have one in the lease agreement under the insurance. Obviously, that's a very tall tower. I think the last time I took the steps up, I was in 4th grade, maybe. Seemed like going up to the Eiffel Tower. But what type of, do we have appropriate insurance limitations? And if the tower was to ever tip over or fall, or?
As far as the tower would be included in the county's regular inventory of property that's insured and fall under those parameters. The lease does provide that there is to be no climbing of the tower unless previous permission is given. Obviously, to put the cameras up there, there's going to have to be some climbing. The lease also provides that a report is to be made of the structural soundness of the tower and provided to the county by a Florida registered engineer.
Okay.
So if there are problems with the structure of the tower, it should be brought to the county's attention with the inspection of the engineer.
Okay.
Anything further from the board? Chief, could you give me your take on this?
I said before this board a few years ago, and the board was very kind and said that staff should work as closely as we could with the Historical Society and make this project move forward, and we have in good faith to try to help them as much as we could. And we're back today. I think they would be a good neighbor. They'd be, I think it's a historical project by the Historical Society, but we have committed to providing space if they have a field day or a bus or somebody come in where they have a large grouping that would occur there. And so we have no opposition to what's moving forward today.
Well, and thank you for that, Chief. You said good neighbors. I think it's more than that. It's actually a symbiotic relationship. I think the benefits of the tower, although that's not in discussion today, the benefits of the tower are quite abundant. It's not a matter of a historical landmark that people will travel from Wisconsin to ensure they see it when they're here in Vero. However, it is a great part of our heritage, our history of when the area had to be viewed from a point, a lookout point for the threat of fire when this was a little bit more of a forested area. And it's quite the sight. Always admired it. And I know we had that discussion, but the preservation of our history is very important to know where we're going, to know where we've been. And I appreciate the Historical Society's efforts. I know that Ruth is coming down because the Commissioner has done a lot of work to ensure that this moves forward, and a lot of funding mechanisms have been looked at. I'm quite excited, but I wanted to point out something else about the symbiotic relationship. I understand that the radio operators will also have a part to play in this, and I think that we are fortunate to have them housed in that base of operations. I want to recall back to the hurricanes of when we truly found out the importance of radio operation, when we lost all forms of communication for several hours, and the radio operators carried the ball to ensure that we had outside communication while we were regrouping. And I just think it's a very good learning experience for the community, for school children, and alike, to know where we've been, and perhaps maybe we will have a visiting opportunity, and how so close to the fire station and our service operation. And I think it's also a very good earmark for people to know where exactly that firehouse is, because they have this tower that they can go by. I realize we're built on a grid, but when you're traveling to get to a firehouse, it's very clear where you're going. Thank you. Commissioner Stanbridge.
Good morning.
Morning.
My name is Ruth Stanbridge. I'm on the Board of Directors of the Indian River County Historical Society. And with me today is Carolyn Bailiff back there. She's our president, and also our partner, Dwight Baker and the Amateur Radio Club, our HAMS. Since history is what we do, I want to give you just a very brief history and an update of why we're here today. Several years ago, immediately after the Forest Service property was purchased and before Station 13 was built, the Society sought a temporary lease of the radio shack and the fire tower as a placeholder for a future community restoration and rehabilitation historical project. When Station 13 was completed, the Society, with the permission of the county, proceeded with a grant for the restoration of the Firefighters Park and Fire Tower. That's our name for that property. This grant was awarded, and in July 2016, the funds became available. And we are prepared to begin the work with our project architect, one of our local talents, Chris Crawford, and we discovered there was no site plans or surveys available. It had been a state Forest Service facility. So we didn't know where all the old structures were, the wells, the septic tanks, and what had been on the property. We only had from our memory, not on paper. While we worked through that, we discovered that there was no water connection and then no power source. All had been destroyed for one reason or another. The only water connection was beneath the western side of the concreted driveway of Station 13. And since there was no site plan and no demolition permit, we did not know what happened to the well that had been supplying the water to that little building. So as we checked for the electrical power, we found that we had now a perfect storm. The FP&L power source had been eliminated. We think that when the county decided to expand 4th Street and 43rd Avenue, the FP&L power source was disconnected and swallowed up by the expansion and never replaced. On top of that situation, the section of fencing, which was overgrown at the corner of 43rd and near the proposed curb cut, had been taken down. And recently, a car took down most of the fence and the gate that leads directly to this facility. So we have no security. Our project grant from the Department of State, Division of Historic Preservation, was written to cover the interior wiring and rewiring, the interior plumbing, all inside, a new roof, the parking area, which would include handicap accessibility, and the necessary building materials for the radio shack, and then we will be stabilizing the fire tower. We also have funding for painting all of the inside and out. As we waited for this lease to occur, a local remediation company donated their services to the small building to take out the toxic material and to abate the mold and mildew. We have commitments from a very talented architect, Chris Crawford, and several engineers, including a structural engineer, and we have received already administrative approval from the planning department on the site plan. We have an arborist on call to trim the huge oak trees, and volunteers, among them our retired firefighters, will tackle the other landscaping and demolition projects for the future Firefighters Park and Fire Tower. We also have a commitment from Firehouse Subs, who's going to provide food for the work days. We have a great partner with the Amateur Radio Club, who in their own way are part of Indian River County's history. We know, and we've just seen in the last hurricane, how vital they are to this community. The minute we are finished with the restoration, the Amateur Radio Club, our HAMs, are ready to bring their workshop and their expertise to this radio building and open it for visitors. We have all this, but what we do not have is the infrastructure. Our grant dollars will not extend to pay for the items that would normally come with our building, a building that you would lease, the water, the power, and a septic system. Even with the extras that I usually put into a grant application, the contingency fund, it will not cover this amount, and it cannot even be used for this purpose. So we are now at a crossroads. Our quarterly report to the state is due at the end of the month. Last quarterly, one of the reasons I was able to use that we had no lease, but we also had a hurricane, so they really understood. But this time around, we need to move forward or decline this funding, and we certainly don't want to decline our grant funds. The society has acted in good faith during the last 5 years, and our only goal has to be preserve, restore, and provide a part of Indian River County's history. It's part of Florida's history, too. There's only 1 or 2 of these towers left on the East Coast, and we have 1 of them. We would like to open it so people can see what our amateur radio operators do and how vital they are in our storms and disasters. We want to educate our citizens and our visitors to know that it was always not as technically modern as we have today. And one time you had to use binoculars and big maps and the wind to find out which way the wind was blowing. So we hope that this commission will commit to be a partner with us in providing the infrastructure and the funding that we need for the infrastructure so that we can move forward with our project. And I'm sure you have questions.
Well, no, well, thank you, Commissioner. I, for one, truly appreciate that your level of commitment has been unwavering. That you did state that we're going to make this a point of interest, and I think you've done your part in your whole team with applying for grants and working public initiatives and support. I want to thank you for that. I truly don't have questions regarding the operation of the tower or the opening of the tower. I know that when you're committed, it's going to happen. And I do believe that it needs the appropriate infrastructure so that we can have the relationship that I earlier spoke of with the radio operators and the Historical Society to keep this on the map. Commissioners? County Administrator. Jason?
I just want to provide one point of clarification. There was some discussion about insurance before, and there was an allusion to property insurance. We have liability coverage, as is the Historical Society's committing to provide liability coverage. However, it's not really cost feasible for us to provide property coverage of that facility. We're able to get a very limited amount of funding for towers and things like that, property in the open, it's called. We have to insure our things like lights on our baseball fields and our 800 megahertz towers, and those, if there were damage from a hurricane or something like that, potentially that damage could eat up all of those funds available. So I just want everyone to know that the county's not necessarily prepared to insure that for property damage. We're good for liability coverage, and the Historical Society is providing liability coverage also. So I just wanted to clarify that.
Liability only, and
yeah,
the Historical
we have
Society
2 other properties, so we have a substantial insurance that we have already provided, that the county knows that we have the insurance coverage that we need. So that's one of the other items that we've already done. We just cannot get in that building without, we cannot use our funds without the infrastructure in place, and we do not have the funds for the infrastructure.
Mr. Chairman, where I am is I'm good with the staff recommendation and the outline of the things that the county has done and the cost that the Historical Society will have to do.
Is that a motion?
And I'll make that in form of the motion, yes.
And I'll second it. And, you know, I look at some of these other leases we've done, like the Environmental Learning Center. We lease them the land at $1 a year, but they raised all their own funds. They had private financing and had endowments and such to build their facilities they have out there. St. Francis Manor, we lease them land for $1 a year, and they have their own financing projects to build the infrastructure and additions and such. Boys and Girls Club, $1 a year lease with them. They raise their own money, provide their own funds. So, you know, I think this is a great project and look forward to moving it through, but I think if we start funding infrastructure on these type of leases, and everybody's going to come back to us and say, well, we want you to run water for us, and we want you to run sewer, and I just don't think we want to go down that road. So I'm as Commissioner Solari stated, I'm good with the lease agreement, and hopefully the Historical Society can go out back to their membership and find ways to raise funds and pay for the infrastructure.
And Mr. O'Brien, Commissioner O'Brien, I understand where you're coming from, but when we started with the temporary lease, we had all those things, and it was taken away when the various constructions took place, the widening and the Station 13, and so that's why it is not there. We did not eliminate it. It was eliminated and now I could have very well put it into the grant, but it was taken away from us. And all we're asking that you put that back, and then we'll move forward with this project.
I think that was a risk you all took when you took that property. You knew we had the road going on. You knew we were building a fire station there. So I'm still good with my position.
That's fine. Any other
Adams.
questions?
So if that infrastructure is not put back in place, you will not be able to move forward with the project?
No, we cannot. As I said, our grant covers the interior. I mean, we're going to be rewiring, replumbing, painting, structural engineers, architects we might probably have, and pro bono commitments, probably $40,000 just in that. We'll put it back in place, but we need that infrastructure, and that's all we're asking for.
Okay. Go ahead.
Jason, when we talked about this yesterday, didn't you say we were going to allow them to tap in to the water line at the fire station?
Yeah, staff has agreed to let them tap into our water line. We think that there will be a de minimis use, so the cost to the county would be de minimis there. I think there's been discussion of us sharing a Wi-Fi connection that they would use for like a webcam at the top of the tower as well.
Okay. And then also, didn't the health department give them the okay, instead of putting in a full-blown septic system and drain field, that they could use some type of a container or reservoir that would just need to be pumped out periodically due to the low use?
Yeah, the health department was good. We worked with the health department and the Historical Society to arrive at a solution, because at first it looked like there was going to be the requirement for a sewer system would have been a substantial expense of $25,000. So the health department worked with us and the Historical Society to allow the use of a holding tank that could be pumped out from time to time due to the de minimis use. So,
and we can absorb the septic system because we've worked very closely with the health department. It's that FP&L connection and also going underneath the concreted driveway that's going to cost the big bucks.
We're talking purely on, again, with all the other factors resolved, we're talking about the utility connection. What's the anticipated cost?
We met with Jason and John, and the FP&L estimate alone was almost $4,000.
How much?
$4,000. And this was taken away when 4th Street was widened, and by rights it should have been put back for the property there, but it was not put back. And then as far as the water connection, we have to go underneath that driveway, which will be a little bit more than just a connection. And the fence again is very vital. We had a fence, or we thought we had a fence, until all these situations happened, and we have no fence now.
Mr. Chairman? Yes. There's a letter from John King, an email rather, dated Monday, and in it he talks about the wireless connection which the county is providing, the potable water and meter fees, the attaching the small buried wastewater tank, and the perimeter fence. And those are items which I'd be happy to incorporate in my motion if Commissioner O'Brien will second it and allow them to be in the lease. But it's those things outlined in John King's email to Jason Brown yesterday. And as my understanding is staff accepts those, and I thought they'd be incorporated in the lease, but I'm happy to announce it now, and if Commissioner O'Brien will.
I'd gladly amend my second, but I take a little exception to using the words by rights. The county purchased this property for a fire station, flat out. That's why we expended taxpayer funds, was to purchase this for a fire station. At the request of the Historical Society, we've agreed to try to salvage some of these things from the site that we don't need, but to say by rights you should get this or by rights you should get that, I totally disagree with. I think we've worked very hard to cooperate with you. Commissioner Slory just illustrated some other things we're doing to cooperate. But the only rights I see is that we have a responsibility of the taxpayers to use that money wisely for the purchase of the site, and any additional uses that a nonprofit wants to use it for, I think should be borne by the nonprofit, not the taxpayers.
And I'm with Commissioner O'Brien there. From what I've seen over the 3-year period, as I remember, and I could be wrong, this was supposed to come to the county at absolutely no cost to the county. But I understand some things need to be worked out, but as I see it, John King and the fire department have bent over backwards to try to accommodate this. The staff has been, I think, doing everything they reasonably can, but at the end of the day, I think it's a very dangerous move, as Commissioner O'Brien pointed out, to open the door to nonprofits in other ways. And our nonprofit community is one of the greatest, strongest things about Indian River County, but I'm one of those who believes that they need to be separated and kept separated, and breaking that wall down is incredibly problematic and will be incredibly costly to the taxpayers.
Mr. Chairman, just so I understand the amended motion in the second, it's my understanding that the county would then pay for the water connection to, no.
No, as I understand it, according to the memo, the use, the de minimis use, and it's important that we agree that it is a de minimis use, as I understand it, will be borne by the Fire Emergency Services Department, but only because it is a de minimis use. And so, not the connection, that's not in the memo as I understand it, just those things that are clearly outlined in the memo dated January 23rd, 2017, 3:07 p.m. from John King to Jason Brown. And I'll pass this down to the clerk's office so there's no confusion about it.
Okay. And the same holds true as far as the septic system.
Well, the septic system, as I understand it, was agreed to use that different sort of portable pot, which would have to be pumped out from time to time.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Commissioner Adams.
Yeah, it's just to continue my comments. I would hate to see this project go away because I think it's very important to protect our culture and history of the state of Florida, and there's too little of these sites left. We are lucky enough to have one. I know perhaps it's not the most exciting thing for some people, but it is to me. I think it's very important that we take the time that we have to protect what got us to where we are, so future generations can understand what it was like at that time. And just to comment on Commissioner O'Brien's examples of the Boys and Girls Club. That was a great project, and that is something that is $1 a year. But I would venture to guess, and I was not around when you guys did that, that property was given to them with water and electric connection. So I think that that's a little bit different. And my last comment is I think that if this project doesn't go through and we are in the position where we're going to have to tear that tower down, it would cost us a lot more than what it would take to partner with the Historical Society to move the project forward.
Thank you. Commissioner Zorc.
On the electric charge, I'd be happy to have a discussion with our FP&L representative. I'm thinking that 4th Street was 4-lane at the turning point at the intersection, which might have taken the pole out, but that was probably a 10-year window ago. I drive that area frequently. It wasn't as recent. But to have a discussion with FP&L to see what we could do to lessen the cost or get them to do something they might feel compelled to do to look at reducing the cost for that. I would think on the building it had the overhead mass service. I think, was it on the west side or south side of the building? I can't remember.
We're going to put it on the north side of the little building.
So that would be
we will have to be running the
underground.
FP&L underground, which will go under the existing driveway that we'd be using. And we do have funding for that because that's in our structural funds. It's that outside infrastructure that we were counting on just to connect that we didn't put in our grant, because normally that's what you get with a lease. And I think the circumstances where all this went away was just accidental. They built Station 13 and the connection was under the driveway. They took the power pole away, or the power connection, FP&L did, when they moved, extended over 4th Street because the sidewalk was moved over. And the fence had been taken down because they had to move the sidewalk over. And then the car hit the fence, so that demolished the rest of it. So now we are, 5 years later, and we have some of these things that just evaporated. And we were very in good faith trying to put this back together because we think this is such a unique, ionic, that tower. And it's been there through so many years and so many hurricanes from the 50s that we felt that this was definitely something that we needed in our inventory.
So I'd be happy to arrange a meeting with their representative go ahead, to see what we could do to see what they would be willing to bring to the table on their side, since it's a kind of a community outreach project of sorts, and see what they say. I'd say putting the electric on the north side of the building eliminates the ability for an overhead drop service, because the prior meter riser is on the south or the west side, and then you could do an overhead drop, which would then be a no-cost drop for FP&L. So there may be a reason to put it on the north side, but for $4,000, if you can put it on the other side, I would try to say it, but I don't know how you're doing the building, so that may not be as practical, but trying to stay historically how it was, but be happy to meet with you and then talk with them and just see what other.
We have a little bit of a time constraint too because of the quarterly report due at the end of the month, and we either have to release the funds back to Tallahassee or try to move forward.
And I know they're having their Solar Energy Center open house next Tuesday at the IG building, so I know a number of FP&L representatives will be here, so I'm sure we could meet prior to that. I think that's next Tuesday, so we could meet with them, but or earlier, even before the end of the week, to try to see what could be figured out.
To Commissioner Zorc's question, the weatherhead is on the west side of the structure.
That's what I was.
It's,
okay.
It's through the roof, overhead,
right.
Weatherhead. The other question that was discussed was about the fence. The fence was damaged by a traffic accident. I'm working with risk management. They're working with the insurance company, car insurance company, to see if we can get as much money back as we can to repair the fence. Mm-hmm. And I don't have the exact answer, but I know we're working tirelessly to try to get that fixed.
Okay.
Any other questions? There may be someone that would like to speak.
I've been sitting too long. My name is Dwight Baker. I'm at 1590 46th Avenue, Vero Beach. I've been an amateur for 58 years, longer than most of you have been around. I've been a very active amateur. I want you to understand what we do and who we are. We're individuals who took on responsibility of caring for our community. Believe it or not, there is over 600 hams in Indian River County who cannot get on the air because of homeowners association restriction. We failed to make that in federal case this year, but that's another issue. I want you to know, on behalf of the Amateur Radio Club of Vero Beach, we appreciate all that this commission and prior commissions have done to support us. We've tried to reciprocate. Hurricane Matthew is a good example, and a very recent example. We had an operator in every center, and we had communication. We told the county where, who, and how many, where they were, and what their conditions were. We are willing to stand up and work again. We appreciate Chief King here. He has been a great supporter. And we want to continue our tradition of helping the community. And that's just an ad for you to think about. We don't care about the money. We pay our own way. Our job, if we understand it, with the Historical Society is that we will maintain the building open to the public. We will take care of them. We will cite the history of the tower, the history of the county. And I'm kind of rambling, but I want you to know that we do appreciate it. And I wish that the county can see its way to help the Historical Society. Thank you.
Thank you, Dwight. Thank you for all that you do in our time of need with radio operations. Did you have another comment?
Oh, I was just say, after 58 years, I think you go from amateur to expert.
But then it would be hems instead of hams, so it sounds better. So I think that's...
Oh, and also just for the information, the FP&L meeting is actually for this Thursday, 2 days from today, and be happy to meet with them, their representatives, before that. So it is actually in 2 days that I think we could have a discussion with them.
Well, the motion's been stated, and we do have a second, which does not include the financing of the infrastructure, but it includes all the other aspects and the lease as well. It does not sound like we will be able to count to three. On the other end, I'm very happy that we will have a lease, a relationship, we're moving forward, and I appreciate everything that the Historical Society has done, but some good points were brought up about financing infrastructure that was not there. And again, you have to be reminded of the fact that the tower it was expected that the tower would have to be taken down, that it was no longer safe for any activity, and it did appear just several years back that tower was going to come down. And I appreciate the fact that the Historical Society has stepped up to the plate and gotten a lot of granting, but unfortunately, I don't know if we're going to have the support of the infrastructure request. I will be committed to do the same thing and speak in the behalf of the Historical Society. We have seen that sometimes our relationship with the utilities, with the governmental representative, has paid well. Go back to 2006 when we needed a turn lane done. We were told it was impossible, and it affected 3 schools. And within just a short order, FP&L came through and said that's absurd. We're not going to wait a year. We're going to do it now. So I think that there might be some latitude for FP&L to step up to the plate, and well, I can't speak for them. I anticipate them being eager to assist in this very rewarding project. With that, is there anybody from the audience that wish to speak or add anything to this? Okay, the motion is clear. Mr. Johnson.
Bob Johnson, Carlin Subdivision. What is the definition of the emergency taxing district? Does it not include a provision for for the county to use the taxing district funds for this as a, say, a sublet of the Station 13? This is, you know, over here we have this old station, this old fire operation over here, and then here's our new operation. Ties all together, it seems like to me. I don't know. I don't know what the, I don't know how much total we're talking about for the infrastructure, but.
The fire tower was never our operation, and in addition, it was Division of Forestry.
It's history of the county. Someplace along the line, that tower got built in Indian River County. I mean, so I appreciate what, and I agree with what Peter says, but on the other hand, this could be a sub-element of the Station 13, an add-on, a modification to the Station 13, possibly. But I think we ought to support it.
Well, that's,
I mean, I talked, in Vietnam, we talked on ham from Vietnam to Barry Goldwater's ham station in Arizona that allows us to talk to our relatives and parents. I mean, this operation is not just a ham, just in the local. It's a worldwide operation. I think we ought to give it a second look. Thank you.
well, I agree with you that it's an invaluable tool, and again, fully support the Historical Society's efforts. But what you stated about the fire tower was never ours to begin with. It was a Division of Forestry's facility. It does not play part and parcel to the fire district. I believe we're prohibited from using any fire district funds for this historical effort. There's no relationship other than the perceived symbiotic relationship of the existence of the radio and the landmark that is associated with fire or fire service, but it has no relationship with our fire district. Counselor, correct?
Yes, I'm sure Mr. Brown would agree with me on that.
Yes.
All in agreement. Okay, and Chief, I appreciate the passion for it. I do share it, but if we're not going to see 3 votes for funding, we're not going to see 3 votes for funding. I don't know what other compelling information we can give. It's just $4,000. But I understand that there is some concern that we are opening up Pandora's box of everyone needing infrastructure, and it has to be brought forward by the commission. I'll do whatever I can to assist in getting that procured, but we'll have to stand by the commission's decision. With that, we have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
Motion carries 4-1 with Commissioner Susan Adams dissenting. I did not dissent because I want the agreement to go forward, and I want this to take place, and I believe that there is an 11th hour lateral pass that can be made to ensure that it goes through with the full understanding that there was not 3 votes for funding. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioners.
Did you want to comment on this?
Yes,
Thank you.
please. My name is Carolyn Bayless. I'm at 1516 35th Avenue, Vero Beach. I am the president of the Indian River County Historical Society. I thank you all for everything you've done for us. We declined the lease, and we will be returning the money to the state of Florida. Thank you.
So I guess I don't call FP&O. Right.
Counsel, yes?
Okay.
What is that, Counsel?
Oh, he said, suggest not setting up the meeting for Thursday with FP&O.
Well, that might be a comment. I realize that a verbal response is a lawful business agreement. However, there might be some room for discussion, and I don't want to put a cloak over the comment that it would be declined. There might be an 11th and a half hour discussion, and if there is something that would possibly encourage a reconsideration of the lease, then I would like to leave that window of opportunity open. So I don't know necessarily if we would not want to have a meeting. I know I will speak, and I understand that Commissioner Zorc will probably intend on speaking, and perhaps maybe we can reconsider what we just heard.
Mr. Chairman, if I might ask, John, do you know the actual physical address of the forestry tower portion? Did it have its own address at one time?
At one time, the whole complex had an address, and there was 3 residences there. Actually, 2 of them are business offices.
Okay.
I don't think they were addressed separately, and but I can forward you after the meeting or and give you the address as
Yeah,
I
if you
know
could,
it for that
you could just
property.
email it over, and that way I can send it to my contact at FP&L just so they can pull up some background information on it for the person I'll meet with.
It's been without electricity for several years at this point, so, but I should be able to find an address either through there or through an old telephone number.
All right, great, thank you.
Thank you.
Florida Department of Agriculture might have been the last user.
Okay.
Yes. Thank you, Commissioner Solari. Next item is we'll move over to the Solid Waste Disposal District. And we'll move for approval of the minutes for the meeting of December.
Second.
That's a motion by Commissioner Solari, seconded by Commissioner O'Brien. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. The next item is amendment number 2 for work order CCNA 2014, work order number 4 to Geocentric for the implementation of the remedial action modified plan at the former South Gifford Road landfill.
Mr. Chairman, this is one of my favorite never-ending stories with the EPA. I would like to let the audience both here and at home know that there have basically been 2 remediation projects or analysis of prior contamination projects at the old Gifford landfill. This is the subterranean one, the long-going one where we've used some passive means to work on the chemicals and basically make the chemicals inert. It's, from what we've heard and understood in the last years, the project has been fairly successful in remediating the pollutants underground. Nothing bad has turned up in a number of years, and this is something that's required by the Florida Department of Environmental Protection in terms of ongoing remediation and monitoring. And with the other project, it deals with the more surface areas of land, and we've addressed that at different dates. And having said that, I'm happy to move approval of this item.
Commissioners. Hemant Shumeta,
Solid Waste Disposal District. I just want to comment, I have some good news and some promising news. The good news is, in terms of the remediation activities that we're doing and the approach that we took with Geosyntec, as I outlined in the agenda item, we were able to about save $76,000 on the project. Basically, DEP, required us to submit a remediation plan. We submitted that plan. It required a certain number of injections and how much we were going to inject on the biobarrier. We asked to do a refinement of that design, and that did cost. We came back earlier in the year, or last year, for that analysis, and we're able to now implement the project with this approval and save overall about $76,000. The other promising news that I have on the site related to the groundwater is we had a call with Art Torvella. He's our DEP liaison yesterday. And one of the things that Geosyntec has done is they've used a Air Force software system to basically do a statistical analysis of all the groundwater sampling that we've done. And we basically verbally presented that information to DEP yesterday, and what our recommendation is going to be in the next report is to reduce 21 monitoring wells that we sample twice a year down to once a year. And that will save an additional about $15,000 estimate right now a year on the sampling cost. So the DEP was open to receiving that information, analyzing that statistical analysis, and hopefully we'll get the news down the road that they will let us reduce that sample frequency of those 21 wells instead of twice a year down to once a year. So in the past, they've been open to these type of things. They've reduced the frequency of the reporting. They used to require us to submit a report twice a year. They worked with us to now only submit a report once a year. So just some promising news hopefully down the road.
Thank you, Amancha. Commissioners, any questions of staff? We have a motion from Commissioner Solari, seconded by Commissioner Zorc. Any discussion from the public? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. And the next item on the agenda is the update on the Brownfields redevelopment process for the former South Gifford Road landfill site.
Good morning, Commissioners. Again, Himanshu Mehta, Solid Waste Disposal District. I know it's been a long meeting. We'll try to go through this as fast as we can. I'm here with Jill Johnson with Geosyntec and Stephanie Height with the Treasure Coast Regional Planning Council. We do have a presentation for you. And this is the update on the brownfield redevelopment process for the former Gifford Road landfill site. Quick outline of the presentation. I'm going to go through a timeline and some previous board directions. I know we have a new commissioner on board that is getting involved with this site. We're going to talk about some of the existing county uses that we have at the site now, update on the City of Vero Beach property, a regulatory update. We talked to Art a little bit about the brownfield process. Jill will go through the assessment history. Stephanie's going to give you an update on their EPA grant that they're working on right now, and the first meeting that we had with the Gifford community. We're going to talk about the redevelopment considerations, and ultimately we want to get some board input and direction on the site. This project, in terms of redevelopment consideration, started back in 2013, where the County Commission applied for a grant from the Treasure Coast Regional Planning Council, and we authorized them site access. The Treasure Coast Regional Planning Council was working on they had a previous EPA grant. We applied for that grant funding, and we were able to get that. In July of 2014, the board approved the Gifford Neighborhood Plan, and with that plan, there was support for sort of redevelopment of the site and to community markets and whatnot. Through the funding from TCRPC, from March 2014 through 2015, both their funding and the county funding was about $80,000 each. We wound up doing an assessment of the surface area, if you will. We looked at the soils, we looked at the landfill gas situation, and the cover material on the site. We did provide an update to the Gifford Progressive Civic League. Again, we wanted them to understand the findings of that assessment process, to reassure them that we had the data to move forward with the redevelopment. They, at the meeting, also voted in favor of doing some sort of a recreational use for that site and some sort of a market. Last year, the TCRPC applied for a grant and received another grant from the EPA. And as a result of that grant, they were able to come back to the county and with an opportunity to continue sort of the brownfield redevelopment process. And in December of last year, we had a community design workshop meeting at the Gifford Community Center. I want to just go over some of the previous board direction for this site. At the March 3rd, 2015, and from the board minutes, one of the action was to acquire community input and support for redevelopment planning of the site. The county administrator was directed to meet with the Public Works, Utilities, and SWID staff to discuss the long-term needs of the landfill property. We were authorized to contact the city of Vero Beach, discuss the airport property and what, which is south of the county parcel, and what their future use may be, and also to continue dialogue with DEP and the TCRPC related to any permitting requirements and funding opportunities for the site. Related to existing county uses, we have the Gifford Convenience Center. This is on the north end is the 41st Street corridor. To the west of the Fleet facility. Our current convenience center is about 2.2 acres. And we also have, right across from the Road and Bridge facility, we have the Road and Bridge compound that's on this Gifford landfill site, and that's about 12.3 acres currently. Later on, what I've highlighted here, the 3 to 5 acres and 12 to 15 acres, is an area that I'll reference later as an area we feel that we want to reserve as a buffer area for county uses in the future. The City of Vero Beach property, again, the outline here in black, that's the overall original Gifford Road landfill site. The county property is the northern half, 55 acres. The southern half is owned by the City of Vero Beach. It's about 60 acres. We met with city staff back in April of 2015. They had an overall interest in a passive redevelopment of the site and some sort of nature trails. Just last week, we talked to Eric Menger, and he informed us that there's an airport master plan that's been approved both by the City Council and FAA, and they have 3 sustainability development sites where they've feel that a solar farm is a compatible use in the vicinity of the airport property. And the shaded area in the blue, and we'll talk about that again later, is one of those 3 areas that they've identified. And as you can see, it covers the former Gifford Road landfill site and you know, probably total about 80 acres there that the city would have. Regulatory update, again, we talked to Art about this site. They do feel that redevelopment is a good project for an old landfill site. They do support this project. They related to specific permitting requirements. They felt that until we can actually come up with a project plan as to what we want to do, they'd be happy to meet with us, but right now it's too early to direct us in any sort of permitting requirements. They did mention that there's a Florida Brownfields program that could provide some financial incentives and potential access to additional grant funding. He referenced up to $200,000 and possibly some tax credits that could be available to Indian River County. And now I'll turn it over to Jill to go over some of the assessment findings.
So much you mentioned, thank you. I saw a green light, but in 2014 and 2015, we did some assessment on the site using both county funds and the grant funding from the Regional Planning Council. We focused those activities on understanding the site conditions so that we can make sure we're moving forward with any project at the site in the most safe manner. And all of the data we've collected to date makes us very comfortable with moving forward, and everything we found can be addressed. That's one of the things we wanted to kind of make sure we talked about today. Obviously, it's an old landfill, so you know, we need to understand what's there, but everything that we've found so far supports any of the end uses that we've, you know, that have been discussed. So the conditions that we found at the site, they're very typical that you would expect at a closed landfill. We did find 2 chemicals present in the shallow soil that are above state regulatory criteria, but well within the concentrations that you find in any urban area. And there are some focused areas of the site that have less than 2 foot of cover. But again, that's something, once we decide what you might use the site for, that's something that just can be designed around and dealt with at that point. There is landfill gas present, as would be expected, because this is an old landfill. Some methane and some carbon dioxide, but again, once you get to a point where you're making some specific decisions about a project plan for the site, that's something else that can be mitigated for. It's a very common thing. There's projects like this all over, a lot of success stories, and I can talk more about the mitigation factors as we move forward, but Stephanie's going to talk about the process a little bit.
Hi. So under the current EPA Brownfields grant that we have, we've contracted with Geosyntec to work with Treasure Coast Regional Planning Council and Geosyntec to basically have some public meetings and workshops and develop some conceptual plans of what might go on the property while looking at the costs and also the environmental concerns, as Jill said, that might need to be looked at when we determine what you might want to put there. So the first task is the community stakeholders meeting. This is a public design workshop, and it was done to solicit the ideas from the community stakeholders to get their input on what they wanted to see at this site and what they needed, and ensure that the site is transformed into a community asset. So the second step, what we're doing with the process now is Treasure Coast Regional Planning Council is developing from those plans that were developed with the community stakeholders some conceptual plans for the site, and Geosyntec is working to prepare cost estimates for maintenance, the implementation, and the operation, and also they will be evaluating the environmental challenges that are on the property. So the third thing is kind of a work in progress meeting. We're going to go back to the community, show them the plans we have. We're going to discuss it with them. We're going to get further input from the community of what they like, what they don't like, maybe what can be done. And the object of that is to come out of that with a plan, like one plan that is amenable to everyone to move forward. At that point, once we've completed that draft plan, we're going to bring it back to you so we can get your input, your suggestions, what you would like to see on the site. At that time, there'll also be some recommendations for some opportunities maybe for funding of the redevelopment activities. So the first task is next slide please, the community workshop, and here's some pictures from that day. It was on December 10th. We held it at the Gifford Community Center. The goal of that workshop was just to engage the public attendees to brainstorm ideas of what they wanted to see on that landfill site. So at the workshop, the attendees were told to just provide their input, to brainstorm, and to give their vision of what they would like to see there and what they need there. And we told them, don't worry about the funding now. Funding will fit into later. They were just supposed to give their ideas, knowing that they may not be possible, but we just wanted them to kind of dream that day and give us what they want there. So next slide, please. So they developed 2 plans. Now this first plan, Plan A, as you can see, they wanted to have a cultural arts building, and they talked about maybe dedicating it to someone like the Highwaymen. They would have rotating exhibits, performances could be done there, and then they also talked about having studio space possibly for local artists to come there to do their work and to share their craft with the neighborhood and maybe educate some of the children in the neighborhood. They also thought this could be a regional destination for outdoor concerts, picnics. They talked about having open pavilions where you could have family events, weddings. They wanted to have a farmer's market, as well as they talked about having a greenhouse and community garden with raised beds to grow the food and then sell the food to the local residents. They want open trails. They kind of wanted this to be a destination where anybody could come to kind of just commune with nature and enjoy being outdoors. As you can see at the bottom, they have a solar farm. They believe that the solar farm could be used to provide power to the site, but also maybe provide some power to the residents in the neighborhood and cut some of their costs. So the second plan, As you can see, they're thinking along the same lines. They kind of had the same mindset. But this group said there needed to be more than sports to draw people to the area. They wanted to have an amphitheater, to have music concerts, movies on the green, and as you can see, they designed it so that the sound would go towards the airport and away from the neighborhood. Thought that was very considerate. They also wanted the open-sided, like covered but open-sided pavilions, one with tables, picnic tables and chairs where people could come and gather, but then have one that's open and large enough for several people to be able to come and be in the shade and enjoy it. They wanted sports activities, but more like volleyball, shuffleboard courts. They planned for that. They also included the solar element in their plan, as well as storm water management and some native areas. So from the plans, you can see that there was a lot of consensus in the room of what the community wants to have happen at this property. One of the comments that really stood out to me is they said they wanted to call this Gifford's vision for Indian River County rather than Gifford Park, because they want this to be something that all county members can come to and everyone can take advantage of these amenities. Things that they were very concerned about were the costs and the maintenance. That was a big concern of the people there. Some of them talked about maybe they could create a nonprofit organization, maybe that could help raise some funds and fund some of the arts and cultural things that they have. They also had a friendly little fight over who thought that their plan was cheaper, and they also noted that some of these developments, like the green development, the renewable energy, the food, that can also be good when you're applying for maybe grants to help with some of the funding of the activities on them when you're showing this type of activity. So I believe the group had some very well thought ideas. They were very cognizant and well educated of the redevelopment challenge, both financially and environmentally for this site. So it's a good meeting.
Commissioners, what we want to do at this time, just kind of go over some redevelopment considerations. As you've noted in the agenda item, some of the staff concerns that we have is that at the public meeting, and it was myself at the time, we kind of said for the purposes of that workshop, it was imagined to go ahead and move the convenience center next to the road and bridge compound so that they'd have a nice sort of a rectangle area to work with. And so both designs, you see, they had a nice box to work from. But, looking over the practical aspects of this, trying to relocate the Gifford Convenience Center or to reshift the road and bridge compound, it could cost over $2 million. It's just a projected number right now. So that's why, as I mentioned earlier, what staff feels is that we would want to reserve 3 to 5 acres for the Gifford Convenience Center site and leave 12 to 15 acres for the road and bridge compound. Future designs could kind of maybe work around those existing sites. Joe mentioned the landfill gas. It is an old landfill site. One of the concerns we have in any sort of redevelopment, there are engineered controls around it, but we want to, again, remind the board that there is landfill gas present. There is some concern about, gas within enclosed buildings. One of the ideas was about, community gardens, and they did mention raised beds, but we just want to, again, mention to the board with an idea like that, there is a public perception about, growing food and things like that on an old landfill site. Related to the amphitheater idea, one of the things that county administrators mentioned that an amphitheater is already planned for the IRC fairgrounds. There may be a master plan that has that on there. And overall, I think the capital costs for something like this, we feel would be a major impact to taxpayers. The board has asked us to continue, looking for grants and whatnot, and certainly, those are the opportunities that we'd have to pursue. And any sort of facility improvements that are made, there could be ongoing operation and maintenance cost, and that's another concern that county staff has. And I'm going to turn it back over to Jill to kind of address some of these items.
Right. So I think it's important at this point in the process to talk about these concerns and make sure that we're working through them and discussing them and making everybody comfortable with this type of a project. But redevelopment of this type of site is very common. There's some really great success stories all across Florida with redevelopment of closed landfills and other brownfield sites. And DEP has approved this type of use. And the uses range from a very wide range of redevelopment uses, athletic fields, shopping centers, and including all of the other uses that have come up for this property, gardens, community markets, amphitheaters, recreational uses, nature trails. So to just touch on some of the, the considerations that we need to remember as we're moving through this process. The assessment findings and the data set that we've collected do support any number of redevelopment options. I mean, we early in the process took off the table the idea of any residential use, but anything else we can work through that from an engineering perspective and a planning perspective. We can take any of those things into consideration and plan or design around them. So obviously there are some human health and some geotechnical factors with the idea that it's an old landfill. And we can talk about all these ideas until we get to the point where there's, at least we've narrowed down kind of some project plans and some ideas, which is where we're getting to in this process now. Until we have some specific ideas, we haven't gotten into the details on some of those things, but hopefully we're getting to the part in the process where we can start talking about that. If there's landfill gas, if there's an enclosed structure, you need to plan for that. You can mitigate that when you're beginning your building design. And I said here, there's, site design and engineering. We can incorporate engineering controls to mitigate any of these concerns. We can put parking lots or we can add soil where there's not 2 foot of cover, or where we found those couple chemicals above regulatory criteria. We can design buildings to, and in terms of cost, I guess let me touch on this, and especially with the landfill gas, because I know that's one of the concerns. When you're designing a building, if you have to add into it mitigation factors for the landfill gas, it's obviously a slight additional cost. Working on it and understanding those things at this point in the process, early in the process, rather than retrofitting buildings, that's a significant cost. It's a fairly straightforward and not a significant cost addition when you're designing a building if we're doing it if we're planning for these things appropriately. Public perception, I mean, that's always going to be a concern. I'm sure you can add into that. Stephanie's done a lot of this type of project. I mean, there's always going to be public perception. So I think what we're doing moving through this process and making sure that we're communicating openly, that's the best way we can deal with that at this point. Being available to provide the data and answer questions and talk about everybody's concerns. Specifically, one of the ideas was the community garden. And I think it's important to point out, like, the idea of raised beds. That's a critical part of putting any kind of, we're not going to be planting. You wouldn't want to plant in the soil, not really from a technical standpoint, because we can address some of those things. We can bring in clean soil, but really from a perception standpoint. I mean, if you're going to put the money and the time and the effort into redeveloping a site like this, you want to make sure that you're redeveloping it in a way that's going to be, used by the community. So that's an important thing for us to remember throughout the entire process. And at the end of the day, from a technical perspective, we're going to always keep some sort of separation between people and the landfill. And so communicating our plans along that. And then in terms of project costs, the next step in the project, as Stephanie mentioned, as we continue with this planning process, is once we come up with a couple options that everybody likes the idea of considering, we're going to start putting some rough cost estimates to that, because obviously that becomes a key part of this. We can't do anything without the money. But I think Stephanie touched on a lot that I wanted to kind of reiterate, that there are funding options. We've been through this process before. You can get to a point where you advertise for third-party developers. There's private-public partnerships. There's ways such as solar to augment especially the long-term costs. And so I just, in terms of the gardens and public perception, I just wanted to show some of these pictures. This is a good example of a successful project, a brownfields project where they did put a community garden on the site in West Palm Beach. And then, go ahead, that's fine. And then in terms of project costs, Himanshu used this figure already. And we haven't moved any further in terms of the possibility of the solar project, but we just want to keep mentioning it. I mean, it is a good use. It's a very large area, and in terms of project costs, it provides a very interesting idea for providing an ongoing revenue stream to the county to support a project like this. It doesn't have to be part of the project, but it's definitely something to consider as we move forward. We haven't gotten into the details. You know, you already mentioned FP&L. It's one. Kind of the next step, if it becomes something that's interesting, is they're going to want some information from us, but and we'll need to meet with the city of Vero Beach. But at this point, it's just something we want to kind of keep to bring up and show that it's a possibility and kind of keep in our mind for part of the project.
And with that, related to this, Eric Menger is in the audience, so if you have any questions related about the city property and their use, he can probably answer any more questions. And at this point, Commissioners, as it's in your agenda backup, and you know, we wanted to get board input. We wanted to find out kind of what vision do the Commissioners have for this property? What concerns do you have for this property? We do, in terms of, as I mentioned earlier, we do have a recommendation that we reserve 3 to 5 acres for the Gifford Convenience Center, 12 to 15 acres for the Road and Bridge compound, and keep them at their current locations. I think it'd be cost prohibitive to kind of move one or the other at the site. As a sort of an immediate sort of recommendation, we're recommending cleaning up and beautifying the frontage as an initial phase. And we wanted to sort of go ahead and kind of table any other improvements until a future date in terms of, you know, any action at this time. We do, in terms of the direction that the Treasure Coast Regional Planning Council has done, we did want the board to give us some direction on that, specifically either, you know, to cease redevelopment planning efforts in order for staff to consider other options, or kind of authorize them to continue on with the redevelopment planning efforts and you know, the step 2, they've already done step 1 or the task 1. They're at task 2 of taking those 2 ideas, combining them somewhat, or drawing architectural drawings with those, coming up with engineering cost estimates, and then bringing them back to the community at a 3rd meeting to kind of come up with an overall consensus for the plan, and then at a future meeting come back to the board and say, here's the Gifford redevelopment plan, and get more input from you at that time with specific cost estimates and whatnot, and then get future direction on how to proceed. But so for that, you know, we want to turn it over to the commission and to help us provide some direction.
Thank you. Commissioner Solari.
I've got a few comments on this. I want to add a little bit more to the context to try to frame this a little bit differently. Himanshu, you began your discussion on December 13th, I think 2013, but actually the process actually began somewhat before that. A couple of years before that, I mean, when people talk about trying to uplift Gifford, I thought that one of the problems, well, I always have a problem, obviously, with what the government should be doing and what the community and civic portion of our society ought to be doing. But I always thought that the county had a responsibility to at least maintain its property up to a certain level. And my feeling was that we weren't maintaining the old Gifford landfill, especially the frontage, which impacted the Gifford community at the level we should. And I thought about that for a while and felt that we ought to maintain the frontage of our property at least at the level that we would require, say, commercial properties across the street to keep their level. So that was what got me first interested in it. Then there was an article in Inside Vero by Derek Muller on November 20th, 2013, and he, both in that article and prior to that at a BCC meeting, brought up the idea that there were no pickup fields, that the county, even though we had a lot of sports fields throughout the county, didn't have a place where kids could just gather and play. And so when they brought that before the board, I mentioned the old Gifford landfill, and I thought that that might be a place where we could have pickup fields that would be an extremely low-cost project that might bring kids from all over the county into it just to play ball. So something that was incredibly low cost that we might be able to do while we fixed up the frontage to make it what I felt would be fulfilling the county's responsibilities to the community as a whole. So that was, in my view, an important part of your discussion that was missed in terms of county direction. Another part I just want to bring up is I think even though I personally don't think that the pollution in the old Gifford landfill is substantial. That's my view. But in attending all of the meetings about this, particularly Gifford Progressive League meetings, that was something that I picked up as the greatest concern from the community as a whole, which is when I saw the idea of growing food on the site, I was pretty much astounded by that, but also the idea of buildings on the site. I mean, again, reinforced the idea that it would just be, the best thing would just be maybe some of the area for playing fields that could be used and people could feel basically safe on. Interesting, you put $200,000 on a possible grant, which for me was more consistent with a minor redevelopment, just getting playing fields and maybe a pathway around it for again, very passive, very cheap type of activity that we might be able to manage. But the plans, unfortunately, that came up were incredibly expensive. I mean, they in the range somewhere between, it looks like, just ballparking it, $3 to $5 million, which is somewhat of a, yeah, good fun, somewhat of a problem. But, so, I mean, right now, my feeling is that, we ought to just move ahead and clean up the frontage. I'd still be able to listen and see if, we want to allow the Treasure Coast Regional Planning Council to go forward. But the sort of idea that this is long-term meant to be a grandiose park, I think is the wrong direction to go or try to push right now. And for me, given a Vero Beach resident, we've spent 8 years trying to get out of the electric business, I don't want to go anywhere near the electric business. And I'll just note in terms of solar fields, Commissioner Zork already mentioned it, the Thursday meeting at the intergenerational facility is to discuss FP&L plans for 2 sections of land that they'd put solar farms on. So again, the idea of us competing in any way with that is something I would certainly not want to go near. So again, I'd be happy to listen to my fellow commissioners on what they feel about this, but I've been, say, in conservation lands, I've mentioned a number of times, we still have $2.8 million of obligations to other partners on our conservation lands that we partnered with to buy the lands. And we have a 5-year plan that'll take at least 5 years to fulfill that. We've got multiple parks around the county that we've spent less on in terms of maintenance than we need to. So we're 4 or 5 years away from basically meeting that backlog. So for myself, unless we can do something that is both capital, in terms of capital dollars, incredibly inexpensive, and in terms of maintenance-wise, incredibly inexpensive, it's not something I could possibly support. It was never my intention to support something like that. And I'll note that I've already gone on record and happy to go on record of supporting the main pieces of the Gifford neighborhood plan. And so for me, again, with limited dollars, if the Gifford community wants to come back and say, okay, these 2 or 3 priorities are no longer priorities, so you can shift the dollars from there to this, that's one conversation to listen to. But at this point, I don't see how we can add something else to it. So, thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner O'Flynn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a little bit different view of this, and one, I want to thank Geosyntec and Regional Planning Council for hosting the community outreach event. And talking to Regional Planning Council staff, the message I got from that was that while they were a little disappointed in the total turnout at the community event, they thought that the people from the community that showed up had a very deep vested interest in the site, that they had thought out a lot of things that they thought were important to their community. And I for one, would be more than willing to give a lot more weight to that. And I think we'll hear from some of them, but one of the things, what I heard was that one, it was like, well, we already have a lot of ball fields at the Gifford Park. Certainly there might be room here to put in an open field, just so if you have a picnic there, an event, the kids can run over and play kickball or throw a baseball or football around or something. So I don't know if we need to put in more baseball fields here when we have baseball fields already in Gifford. You know, as far as buildings on a old landfill, down in St. Lucie County, they have the county-run Fairwinds Golf Course, which is built on the old St. Lucie County landfill. They have a pro shop, they have a restaurant, you know, they sell food, beer, hot dogs, everything. I have played down there many times. I know it's an old landfill, but you know, you still go in there and you still sit down at the restaurant and have a hot dog and a soda. So I think, as Jill said, that kind of stuff can be engineered. I like the idea of the community gardens. You know, I mean, it can be a raised bed on a liner, or it could be hydroponics. There's a multitude of vertical systems now where you can get it really off the ground and take away the whole, you know, issue of it being in the landfill. But I think that's something the community said, yeah, we would like to have a community garden, a place where people can go, we can show the kids, you know, where food comes from, and maybe grow some healthy vegetables for the kids. I really like the idea of the amphitheater. Maybe not quite as large as y'all drew up here. You know, I would think maybe something just a little bit smaller. I don't think we need something big enough to hold a 200-piece orchestra, but, you know, something to hold a 4 or 5 member band, or, you know, a live mic night, or maybe a trombone or trumpet player. But I think that's one thing lacking, and I know we have it in the plans for the fairgrounds, but, you know, it's not even in our 5-year funding plan. So it's not like that's going to be an imminent thing. And I don't envision this as and this may be a little bit different than what the community envisioned, but I don't envision this as a you know, regional draw. I do envision it more as a community park. And, you know, I kind of look at like JC Park down there in the city on the beach, where they have multiple pavilions and a lot of families go there for birthday parties and events. And I would, you know, I'd envision a little bit more of that instead of just 2 big giant pavilions. I'd have a lot more individual ones, so that, you know, 5 or 6 or 7 families can all have a birthday party there at the same time. So you know, I'm a little bit different there, but I like the idea of the pavilions and picnic tables there and bringing people out there. As far as the convenience center, you know, one question I would have is, what's the cost to close the thing? We're seeing a lot more people recycle with our new franchise agreement. We're seeing a lot more curbside pickup. And so, you know, I would, looking down the road, I'd say, you know, what would be the cost to close it? Or what would be the cost to, if we do move it, a much greater reduced convenience center, where it might just be, you know, excess yard waste and, you know, tires and batteries or something, in a lot smaller scale than what we currently have. You know, I think we're getting bogged down early on what the total cost is. I think you have to start with a plan, and if we come up with a plan that we all say, you know, this is what the community wants, then we can start looking for money. You look for grants. You have fundraisers. You do different things, and we don't have to do this all today. I think, I'm hoping the community realizes this might be a 5 or 10 year project till it's completely done, but we'll never go down that path if we punt now and quit moving forward on the planning. I think we need to go ahead and keep working this, get more input, come up with a good plan, and then we can start building the pieces in it as we go. We don't have to do it today. And then, Commissioner Sawyer, I agree. I don't want to get in the electric utility business, but I think, you know, this is something we could partner with FP&L if they would want to come in and run the solar field. I think that's a great educational thing to show kids that. I think it'd be something that if you do have an amphitheater and, you know, you're going to want some lights there or a sound system or something, You know, it could power that. I'm not thinking we're going to power entire neighborhoods, but I think a small, and I look at, it's Oslo Middle School has a small solar field out in front of their school. And, you know, I'm sure they're not in the utility business, but they have solar power. So I think there's a lot of things here. And I want to thank the community. I think you all were pretty creative. I think you all came and said, this is what we would like to see in a community park. Like I said, I'd like to tweak a few of the things. Instead of large pavilions, I'd like to see multiple smaller ones. But yeah, I think those are all things we can sit down and work on. But I get the message. That's what the community wanted. They wanted some pavilions. They want the amphitheater. They want the community gardens. And I think that's all great for the community. I'd like to see this board, instead of tabling this and dropping it, is to keep moving forward with the planning process and come up with that master plan, and then we can start figuring out ways to fund it and implement it. So that's kind of where I am.
Thank you, Commissioner O'Brien. Commissioner Adams.
Thank you. I just have a couple comments. One, regarding the redevelopment process. The redevelopment or planning process is an exercise in creating a vision for your community. It's not something that happens overnight. It's not something that happens in one meeting, and it's not something that happens with one stroke of the pen. And I view this as this is the first stab at what that vision of the community wants to be. And it needs to be further refined, and it needs to have more meetings and ongoing discussion. There's obviously some parameters that we might need to put in place as far as realistic cost projects. But that being said, I don't want to limit the community from coming up with what their vision is for their community. Having gone through multiple of these projects out in Fellsmere, it's not a quick thing. It's something that, and it shouldn't be rushed, because the end result, you want to be something that everybody buys into and everybody can support. And I think there's elements in both of these initial plans that could probably be blended and work well together. That being said, we've had great success in Fellsmere with community gardening. We have a nonprofit organization that runs the community gardens on city-owned property. And that has just blossomed and blossomed. They're working with the school now. They actually have produce sales on some weekends because they produce so much out there. So I think there's other organizations in the community that could help with that, 4-H master gardeners, all sorts of things that could be done. The solar farm, I think, is one of those great ideas, and I would envision that, as Peter mentioned, as a partnership with FPL or something that FPL would do. I don't think we are the experts on solar, and I don't think that was the intention of the group per se. It was just another idea of a different use that would fit in with what they're trying to create. So personally, I would like to see this process continue. I would like to see us authorize the Treasure Coast Regional Planning Council to continue with this visioning process, have the community further refine what their vision is, and then once that has been solidified, we can figure out what we do or how we move forward with that. But I think I agree, we're getting a little bit in the weeds and ahead of ourselves in what and how this process should work.
Thank you, Commissioner Adams. Commissioner Zoll.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. A couple things on, and we've talked about the solar, that even with the city's parcel, you don't have enough of a footprint to get a utility scale or utility grade where those efficiencies really kick in. Not to say you couldn't have, like Oslo Middle has, they have some panels out front that generate something, but it's a low volume, something that's consumed on site. But to have something that you would even think of exporting into the community, plus it's in the city's territory agreement, so FPL I don't even think could operate in there because of the territory agreements. I'm kind of blended on which way to go with this. Obviously, the community input is good. You've got two plans that I think, as Commissioner Adams said, you could take kind of the best of the two and kind of merge them together, come up with a multi-phased program and then look for ways to shop for it. I would probably say I would change my feeling on the solar a little bit if it was for on-site and it scored more points in the grant, but as long as you got enough in the grant to pay for the solar, because the smaller you go, the higher the cost goes. The ones that, as Commissioner Solari mentioned, to make the numbers work efficiently, they're doing 640 acres. They're doing full section tracts solar farms, and that's kind of the only way to make the numbers work if you're in the utility business. But so you'd weigh the cost. If it cost you $300,000 to put in solar, but you only get a $150,000 grant, solar doesn't work. Also, the city is participating in a solar survey through FMPA to see what is the interest of the City of Vero Beach customers. I think they're up for this month or next month that they're trying to gauge their membership around the state. Are you interested in solar? But the partners putting it on, it's got to be in that 25 to 50 megawatt or 640 acre size to make the numbers work. But I think you could come up with a phased approach. I think, you know, if the people from the community like the idea of the pavilion area, I think more smaller ones. When our kids, we'd had at South County Park try to have a place to have a birthday party. Somebody had to go there at 6 a.m. to stake out the pavilion so that you could have the party at 11. Because if not, by 8:30 they're all gone. So I think there's a benefit of having more of those. It's in somewhat of a walkable distance into the Gifford community. It's sort of on the edge, sort of, but it's not that far away. But I think you could blend the two programs, the two sketch ideas, and compliments to those who worked on putting those together, and come up with, this will go through a few phases of discussion and kind of morphing the ideas together. But there was one thing that on the convenience center, I think taking a stronger look at that as there's more going to contract pickup and less, and I don't know if we have the actual numbers yet of what the reduction at the convenience center. Some may reduce more than others. More people may subscribe than not, and I don't know where this one falls. But at some point, there's a big cost of running those, and if there's a way to either scale down to match the demand or whatever the demand trend is for there, and see what a combined sketch might be. But even with the city's property at the airport in this piece, I just did some rough numbers, you'd be at about 17 megawatts at best if you use the entire two sites, and the minimum threshold is 25 to 50 to make the numbers work, and then once you're beyond 50 to 75, it really works well. But again, depend how it scores on the grant. If you get a 3-to-1 ratio on the grant, that you got more money to do extra stuff because you put in a little bit of solar, that works. But if not, it's nice, but it doesn't bring enough resources to the table. It's a dedicate, in this case, half of the property. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, can I make
Thank you,
two
Commissioner
quick points?
Commissioner Solari.
I just wanted to make two quick points. We've talked about the community a number of times. When I was at the event that Saturday morning, I just want to make sure that people know the community consisted of maybe 8 to 10 non-governmental individuals. So, it wasn't as if there was a big community gathering there. But more importantly, on the solar farms, in the real world, my understanding as 8 years of commissioners is one of our biggest problems in our parks is vandalism. And this is vandalism to porcelain and concrete structures. And I've seen emails on this 4, 5, 6 different times. And one of the problems when we did the Martin Luther King Park was the idea of four-wheelers coming through the park, and we had to put structures in there to try to prevent that some. So I'm just wondering right now, just so we understand for the future, how much damage might be done in one night by a few youngsters on a four-wheeler with a hammer going through a solar farm. I just think, given the location and the problems we have, that is one of the most unrealistic things I've heard. And with that, I'll be quiet. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
I'd say at the South County Park, the restrooms at the South County Park have been vandalized 3 or 4 times in the last year. That one, for whatever reason, over and over again gets vandalized.
And again, I would just reiterate that everything on these plans are conceptual. Nothing is ready to go. This is exactly what it's going to be. These are the first attempts at ideas of what to do. So possibly a solar farm isn't something there, but I would venture to guess that the community wants a little bit more than just a cleared open field. And it should be their ability to have those conversations, whether it's 5 or 8 of them, or 28 or 38 of them. I would like their input into this plan versus what I would like to see there.
Thank you, Commissioner Adams. Yes, and it appears that the weeds are about shoulder height right now. And I believe that we need to hit them with the weed whacker and get back on course.
I'd like to make a motion.
But I would like to,
possible.
if it would be okay, I'd like to
Sure.
discuss some of the things that we've
Sure.
heard today.
To whack the weeds.
I am, well, I want to say that I am in great appreciation for what the community effort is and what our partners are doing. Treasure Coast Regional Planning, thank you for hosting that meeting and supplying a lot of expertise into the room. As Commissioner Solari pointed out, when we attended the meeting, yes, we attended on opposite sides of the room, and there was no exchange or input, but we did work with individuals, and I think it was very productive. Albeit, I was concerned about the attendance, but it may not have been quantity, but it most certainly was quality. A lot of great ideas came out. Some of them have merit, some of them have grave concern. And I agree, we're discussing, we're getting into that a little too much. I think that we should rest our laurels and excitement on the fact that there was a lot of diverse opinion, a lot of support. We would like to see more of it. I would like to see this, again, where we want to return back the citizens' land to the citizens in a very good way. So much so that, as an aside, whatever we do, and I'll just plant the seed, I want to dedicate it. I would like it for one person to dedicate any effort we do to the life and times, the efforts of a man who has watched this place go where it's been and where it is today, and has shown great concern and has been on site visits. We've taken field trips and has done a lot for this community, and that's one Victor Hart. I would like to see whatever we do dedicated to Victor Hart, because I think that every place, every great place needs a name, needs a place that we can place on a map. And that's my thoughts. I just wanted to throw them out today, and we'll have to get consensus and vote on that, and that's up the road, and we're in a public place, and I just wanted to say it. With that, we have to do something positive. Do we have to do something tomorrow morning? No. I point out some of the great things that happened, whether it's the pool, whether it's the intergenerational facility, whether it's the pool in North County, the range, a lot of great things. I know that you're close to that. Fran Adams had a tremendous part to play in a lot of that, but it took time. And we have a situation where we have soil that we've been directed to and compelled to recover. And when we recover it, when we hear ideas of growing vegetables, yes, the concern light does get lit. I do have concern about that one. And yes, we have an idea of an amphitheater. Amphitheaters are very important for a society. We already are looking forward to that happening at a site which is very conducive of large and wide varied attendance, and that would be at the fairgrounds. And, you know, it's not to say we can't work on parallel tracks. Some of these ideas are grand. I'm not going to discard the idea of having a solar environment, something that we can do that maybe on a small scale, we're not supplying power with the community. What we may have is an educational opportunity that can be protected from vandalism, that can be guarded, that can have some benefit for future generations to learn and to develop, and I think we have that commitment as well. One of the discussions that happened during a meeting quite in the past was at the Gifford Neighborhood Plan. We all broke out into groups, and I was at the group that we talked about that site and the merits of doing something like a farmer's market. We're not exactly growing the vegetables there, but having an open farmer's market, and ironically, open fields for sandlot, for baseball, for other sports, for football, that it wasn't a pay-to-play operation, but we were giving back the soil back to the community in a positive way that did not require a lot of maintenance, did not require a huge infrastructure investment that might take some years to develop. And again, this was during pale economic times. We are recovering, and we have to move forward, and I fully support an open dialogue for continued process, and I should hope that the Treasure Coast Regional Planning would like to continue with that commitment and set up another future meeting. Perhaps maybe the ideation stage has to be broadened outward a bit, that maybe we've limited it to 2 good ideas that might have some limitations, so we would like to expand upon them. Maybe there are some ideas, again, it was brought up that, yeah, there was a limited attendance, and perhaps maybe we can increase that attendance, get some more community input, and we can discuss it too, so that we can make this happen. Because I believe that we are on the right pathway, but I believe that we might have taken a side road and brought it here a little hastily, that we need a little more prevalent discussion, and I would like to make this right. We got one shot at it, because if we don't do it the right way, we'll only be tearing it down and doing another way, and future commissions will be dealing with our problems that we developed, and I don't want to see it a problem. I want to see this a very positive thing, that land has been encumbered for many, many years. It's been costly, and I think it's about time to do it the right way. With that, before we talk about a motion, I'd like to see if there's anybody from the audience that would like to step up and say a few words regarding the process and what we've had. Well, Freddie, I don't see a trombone in your hand, so I don't know how you're going to support the amphitheater, but go ahead.
Freddie Woolfolk, 4590 57th Avenue. First of all, I just want to say thank you all as a commission and staff and the great work coming from Treasure Coast and other outside vendors for doing such a great job in bringing this to this point. And as I was sitting there, I thought about myself as a little kid growing up, how I wanted a dual cowboy cap set, you know, guns you get as a kid. I wanted 2 guns, and I wanted to turn around backwards because they say, you know, bam. I wanted that, and my mom said, you got it. I was so happy. She said, what else you want, baby? I said, I want a bicycle. I want a Western Flyer. You know those old Western Flyers they used to have? Oh, yeah. Get it from Western Auto, one of those places. And she said, you got it. My dad got laid off from work before Christmas got around. And my mom came in the room, she said, we may have to change the list. But I still thought I was going to get my 2 guns and my bicycle. Christmas morning came, I only got the 2 guns. I looked for the bicycle and didn't find it. And later on, she came back and told me why. In this scenario we're going through right now, we may not get the 2 bikes and the guns in this instance. But at least we got the realistic approach of moving forward. And when you call us together, and we were called together on that Saturday, it may not be in a packed room, but I learned something about Gifford. Gifford operates on a representative type government. They got 8 people who they knew were going to be there, and those 8 people better bring the report back what happened. So you may not see a packed room in Gifford, but I guarantee you through social media that Linda Morgan and other people do, they let everybody know what's going on. They do know. And they said, did you put my point in? Some people sent notes to tell us what to put down. So don't become discouraged when you see a small group in Gifford. We operate on a representative type format, and kind of sounds similar to what you got here today, you know, representative, because it's not packed right now. But my point is that we are happy to see that those ideas that you see on paper, it was a wish list, and that's all it is, a wish list. We don't expect everything to go from A to Z tomorrow. We know that one day it will materialize. But I thank God, as I will say, I thank God for you all having the tenacity and the willpower to pull us together and give us the opportunity to share those things. Now at least we can go back as representatives and let people know, say, yes, we came, we heard, they received our wish list loud and clear. Now the plan begins. We're going to have to prioritize, find out what things will go forth, keeping in mind the cost, and most of all, understanding that we won't get everything that we asked for. So I did finally get that bicycle. It came about later on, and it wasn't a Western Flyer. It was one of those small, cheaper versions, but it was a bike. So I was happy, and my mom was happy. So I'm saying to you today, we may not get everything, but working together, I'm sure we're going to come up with a plan where we can blend the two and come up with a viral product, not only for Gifford, but for Indian River County. Thank you so much.
Freddie, thank you for your words. I think that when you say we might have something a little different, we may not get everything we need or want, we might get more.
Right.
And we have to look at it in
mind.
both ways, keep an open mind. Right. I see Joe Adelet is approaching the
He's
microphone.
coming to pull my coattail there.
Good morning, Joseph. Well, good afternoon, Joseph.
Good afternoon. Joe Adelet, 4570 57th Avenue. I agree with what all commissioners said. We understand that this process may go 10, 20, 30 years, or it may not happen at all. We understand that. And as for the wish list or whatever we call it, it was just that. But ultimately, when it's all decided, those things it may not even be a solar farm. It may be what Commissioner Solari said, an open field, or it may be like Commissioner O'Brien said, it may be the smaller versions of the
amphitheater.
Yeah, but you understand what I'm saying. So ultimately, it's whatever is decided between the community and the commission is fine, whatever that may be, So, and we also on the bottom line. We are all bottom. I'm a bottom line type of guy also. So I understand about the money as well as time. When it happens, if it happens, we'll love whatever ultimately it be.
Well, Joseph, thank you. I would like to see the timeline a little briefer than that. I would like to be around to see it too. And if I can get the support of two other commissioners, I would also like to see Victor be able to smile and say, we did it. With that, is there anybody else? Thank you.
Good morning. I think it's still morning. I'm Johnny Mae Perry, and I was at the meeting on December 13th, the workshop. I want to say that I appreciate the fact that we had the workshop and we have this discussion this morning, and I'm standing here to ask you to vote to continue the process and allow us the opportunity to at least see how far we can go and what we can get to manifest in our community that can benefit not only Gifford, but the Indian River County community. Thank you.
And thank you for that. Appreciate it. Is there anybody else who wants to speak in behalf of this? I knew we'd get you out.
Well, Julianne, Department of Health.
Teddy Ford, Indian River County Sheriff's Office.
We're just grateful for the collaboration that's happened so far, and I think it's wonderful that you've asked the community what they would like to see there. And you know, if any one thing comes off of that wish list, that's a huge accomplishment and something to aspire to. So, thank you.
Just to remind you, Freddie said it where it might be fewer numbers in the building when they're there, but when we get out of here, Victor has a way of getting what happened down at the commission meeting. So we have to report back to him what has happened today, and we're just grateful. Just for the idea, just to seeing it, Joe, when we were out there on patrol, to see that our future, have a great mentor like Mr. Wood Falk and all of those guys, and you, Commissioner, just saying that we continue to make our kids see, because a lot of people have to see it happen to make them believe. A lot of things have happened in the past, and we're getting away from that, but we want them to see the vision that we have and continue to pave it, and I think today is great. I want to thank Treasure Coast Regional Committee for what they're doing, coming out, taking the time. Joe and I were in transition, running from one event to the other. Commissioner Solari was there, and it's good to see the people who say we really care for you. So we're real grateful for you today. You really made a milestone, and we continue. You know what I mean? I always hear Freddie say we don't throw the baby out with the bath water. We just continue to walk forward. Thank you again.
Well, Teddy, I appreciate your words. I will say that I sincerely hope that if that's the manner in which the vote goes today, that we continue the process.
Yes.
And that if we can know beforehand if we would still have that level of commitment from the Treasure Coast Regional Planning Council. I'm seeing a nod from Mike. Mike, you want to say a couple of words?
Yeah, he's worse than Freddie as far as only saying a couple words.
I did say a couple.
Thank you. We're just happy to be back in Indian River County working again, and with the community, that's what we do best. So we appreciate any support you can give us. And you know, as well as everybody else knows on this board, and Dylan and Jason, we'll do whatever it takes to get this done. Okay.
So Michael, it sounds like we still have a continued level of commitment if it is determined today that we will just continue this process and look for other options and continue to enhance what we have at this time?
Yes.
So we can have some more meeting?
Yes.
Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
Yes, I'm Barbara Lipton, and I live at 760 23rd Place Southwest. No, I do not live in Gifford. Yes, I am concerned about what goes on in Gifford. And I'm particularly interested in that piece of property. I moved to Indian River County in 1997, and I worked at the Indian River Humane Society that was on that property all those years ago. I saw that building tore down. Every time I drive that street, it makes me sick to my stomach when I see that what it is at the moment. It's disgraceful that the county has allowed all those years to go by with the weeds growing up and the trees growing up and the fences. It does look like a city dump. And I think it's really time something's done. I'm delighted that we're beginning to look at it. I personally don't care what goes there, as long as it's cleaned up and it looks better and represents our county looking like we should be appearing. Thank you for your time, and thank you for everything you're doing.
And thank you for your input, too. Commissioner Adams, you were just getting about ready to make a motion, and I just wanted to hear from the rest of the community, so please.
Fine, I appreciate you allowing that to occur. I'd just like to make a motion to authorize the Treasure Coast Regional Planning Council to continue with the redevelopment planning efforts as outlined in the above tasks 2, 3, and 4 with direction from the SWID board. And I would also like to include the cleanup and beautification of the county frontage in the initial phase.
Second. Outstanding. Do we have any other further discussion on the board?
We want to get clarification. Do we want to reserve the location of the convenience center and the road and bridge complex where they are?
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to weigh in on that. To that point, I think we have to keep the 12, 15 acres where the road and bridge is. But when you go through, Stephanie, and you design some of this, I would like to see you do one with the convenience center still in place, and then one version with it moved or eliminated. So I'm not ready to commit that 3 to 5 acres as sacred. I think the 10 to 12, yes, but I'd like to keep the flexibility on the 3 to 5 acres on the convenience center.
Okay. My staff's concern is
if the motion maker.
Yeah.
I'm fine with that as the motion.
And as a second, I'm fine with that, and thank you for the use of the weed whacker.
You need something bigger than that.
Staff's concern is just investing more SWID dollars in moving a convenience center or building a new one, because we've got some other potential substantial expenses moving forward. So, but
And-
we've got the
And Jay,
direction.
I get that, and maybe we leave it there, but I don't want
I like the two different
to
options. That's good.
cementize
Yeah.
that right now, yeah.
Yeah, you know, as Mr. Idelette said, that, you know, in 10, 20 years, well, I think we are looking at 10 and 20 years if we have to start purchasing land and redevelop and redesign. So we might want to leave that in the option basket for now to see if we can get it so that we can get this project a little quicker in motion. So thank you. All right, we have a motion by Commissioner Adams, seconded by myself. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
Motion carries 4-1 with Commissioner Solari dissenting. And with that, is there anything further, any other business that has to be expressed today? Thank you. We appreciate it.